They say the edges of our maps are not the end of the world, but the beginning of questions too large to answer. For centuries, sailors and explorers spoke of walls of ice rising like fortresses at the bottom of the earth, silent and impenetrable. Some claimed these walls were nature's last defense. Others whispered they were built, not by human hands, but by something older, something hidden. In the mid-20th century, Admiral Richard Bird returned from Antarctica speaking in riddles about lands beyond the pole, vast and untouched, as though he had seen a world forbidden to ordinary eyes. Theories multiplied. Flat Earth believers imagined an endless ring of ice. Hollow Earth supporters dreamed of hidden entrances leading downward, while still others pointed to accounts of giants and pale beings standing watch in the snow. Were these guardians real, or only shadows shaped by isolation and fear? Governments have sealed most of Antarctica from us, leaving the continent as the planet's largest blind spot, a stage upon which mystery itself performs. Tonight, we trace those whispers, from lost expeditions to secret diaries, from rumor to possibility. This is not a story with answers, but with doors left ajar. Welcome to Historic Sleep. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. Long before satellites traced their silent arcs above our skies, before airplanes stitched continents together with their roaring trails, the southernmost reaches of Earth existed only as a rumor on faded maps. For centuries, it was marked with a simple phrase, terra incognita, the unknown land. Cartographers shaded the bottom of the globe with imagination rather than observation, sketching monstrous creatures or endless glaciers where no one had ever set foot. It was into this emptiness that Sir James Clark Ross sailed in 1841, commanding the ships Erebus and Terror, vessels that themselves would later vanish in another frozen mystery far to the north. Ross and his men expected harsh seas and hostile winds, but what they encountered was something far stranger, a gleaming wall of ice stretching for miles across the horizon, towering higher than the masts of their ships. It rose like a colossal barrier, as if some architect of nature, or perhaps something more deliberate, had built a barricade to mark the end of the human world. The crew gazed up in silence, their sense of discovery mingling uneasily with awe. In their journals, they called it the Great Ice Barrier, what we now know as the Ross Ice Shelf. But they could not shake the feeling that the wall was not just an accident of geology. It seemed too perfect, too absolute, as though its purpose was not only to exist, but to forbid. In the years that followed, whispers spread among mariners. Some said the barrier was not uniform ice, but layered stone and snow fused together, an ancient wall frozen in time. Others claimed they saw dark silhouettes upon its ledges, shapes that vanished when looked at too long. Officially, these were tricks of distance and shadow, illusions created by weary eyes after weeks at sea. Yet the legends endured, whispered in taverns and trading ports, that the bottom of the world was guarded. These stories remained folklore until the 20th century, when technology allowed explorers to press further into the continent, and when one man, Admiral Richard Bird, returned from his expeditions with words that seemed less like reports and more like riddles. Bird was a decorated American naval officer, a man of discipline and precision. But after Operation High Jump in 1947, he spoke of discoveries that unsettled his contemporaries. He told of lands as large as the United States, lying beyond the South Pole, untouched and unseen by human eyes. To some, this was exaggeration or poetic flourish. To others, it was evidence that the maps were incomplete and that something vast lay concealed behind the known. His remarks ignited new speculation. If there were lands beyond the pole, who or what resided there? Why were they invisible to all but a few? Theories sprouted like weeds in the cracks of official silence. Flat Earth believers claimed Antarctica was not a continent at all, but a ring of ice encircling our world, a wall that kept the oceans contained. If such a wall existed, they argued, surely someone must guard it. Hollow Earth proponents believed Bird had glimpsed entrances into the planet's hidden interior, realms populated by civilizations far older than ours. In both visions, the idea of guardians, whether ancient beings or secret sentinels, took root. What makes these tales compelling is not their certainty, but their persistence. Time and again, reports emerged from scientists, sailors, and even soldiers stationed in Antarctica. A Chilean team in the 1960s described tall figures moving around their camp at twilight, their shapes human, yet not human, their silence more terrifying than sound. Later, pilots spoke of bright spheres that appeared without warning, escorting them away from restricted zones before vanishing back into the sky. These accounts, dismissed in official channels, survived in whispers, often retold only years later when witnesses were safe from reprimand. They share a common thread: the sense of being watched, of boundaries enforced by an intelligence that does not announce itself, but makes its presence known in the most primal way, through fear, awe, and silence. The landscape of Antarctica itself seems designed to foster such impressions. Blizzards sweep across the plains without warning, obliterating landmarks, erasing tracks as though no one had ever walked there. Compass needles twitch and spin, satellites capture blurred images, and no-fly zones mark the sky above. Each of these can be explained by natural causes: magnetic anomalies, extreme weather, safety protocols, but explanations do not erase experience. To those who have glimpsed figures in the storm or heard machinery fail in the stillness, Antarctica feels less like wilderness and more like a territory already claimed, already defended. The ice becomes not just a barrier of nature, but a wall of intention. It is here that the term ice wall guardians gains its power. Whether imagined or real, whether born from exhaustion or encounter, the phrase suggests a presence woven into the very fabric of the frozen continent. Guardians imply purpose: to protect, to deter, to separate. What is it they guard? Theories multiply. Some say they are protectors of hidden civilizations beneath the ice, perhaps remnants of Atlantis or even older cultures erased from history. Others believe they are not terrestrial at all, but beings whose origin lies among the stars, stationed here in ages past to ensure humanity never breaches certain thresholds. There are even those who tie them to biblical tales of the Nephilim, giants cast down and imprisoned, their descendants lingering still in the cold. The difficulty lies in the lack of proof. Photographs are scarce, often blurry or inconclusive. Testimonies are anecdotal, often shared long after the fact. And yet, the absence of definitive evidence has not weakened the myth. It has strengthened it. Secrecy breeds belief. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959, signed by the world's powers to preserve the continent for peaceful scientific research, is hailed by some as an act of noble cooperation. But to others, it is the ultimate cover story, a global pact to keep ordinary people far from what should not be seen. The very fact that the treaty remains in force, enforced with vigilance, feeds the suspicion that Antarctica is not merely a desert of ice, but a vault of secrets. To step back and view these threads together, Ross's towering wall, Bird's cryptic words, whispered sightings of giants in the snow, governments united in silence, is to enter a landscape where the boundaries between history and myth dissolve. In that vast and frozen expanse, we confront not only the unknown, but the deliberate act of concealment. Was the ice always meant to stand as a natural frontier, or has it become the last curtain drawn across truths too disruptive for the world to face? As the winds howl and snow buries the traces of every expedition, the question lingers, haunting and unresolved. The Guardians, if they exist, have kept their vigil well, and we, standing at the edges of what we are allowed to know, are left only with stories that refuse to die. Shadows glimpsed at the edge of vision, reminders that sometimes the most profound mysteries lie not in the stars above, but in the ice beneath our feet. In the winter of 1946, as the world was still catching its breath after the devastation of the Second World War, the United States launched one of the largest Antarctic expeditions ever attempted. It was called Operation High Jump, and on the surface it looked like a massive scientific and military exercise, a chance to test men and machines in the most unforgiving environment on Earth. 13 ships, dozens of aircraft, and more than 4,000 personnel set sail southward under the command of Admiral Richard E. Bird. Officially, the mission's purpose was to train soldiers, test new equipment, and establish a research base. Yet the scale of the operation, combined with its abrupt and unexplained end, has fueled theories ever since that its true goal was something else entirely. For weeks, the task force carved paths through ice-choked seas. Planes flew reconnaissance missions across vast white landscapes, and scientists recorded data on weather, geology, and magnetism. But then, after only a fraction of the planned time, the expedition was recalled. Men returned shaken, silent, unwilling to discuss what they had witnessed. Bird himself gave interviews that deepened the mystery rather than dispelling it. In one conversation with a Chilean newspaper, he spoke of a land beyond the South Pole, a region as large as the United States, rich in resources, untouched by humans, and unseen by any before. His words were startling, for no such territory appeared on any known map. What did Bird mean? Had he truly seen a new continent, or was he describing something more difficult to put into ordinary terms? Rumors soon spread among sailors who had served on the expedition. Some whispered that their ships had been confronted by flying discs, metallic craft that moved with impossible speed and silence, weapons of light that disrupted machinery and terrified crews. Others recalled patrols vanishing into storms that seemed to form unnaturally fast, only to re-emerge disoriented and unable to explain the experience. There were claims of beams of energy striking near the ships, strange aerial battles that ended not with triumph, but with retreat. Official reports mentioned only accidents and harsh weather, but to those who returned home with haunted eyes, the story was far stranger. They believed they had encountered forces determined to keep them away from something hidden in the ice. Years later, documents and diaries surfaced that supposedly belonged to Bird, recounting experiences too extraordinary to be accepted by the military establishment. In these pages, if authentic, Bird described being drawn into an opening beneath the ice, guided by an unknown force to a hidden world below. He wrote of encountering tall, pale beings who communicated not with words, but directly into his mind. Beings who warned of humanity's destructive path and urged caution in the use of nuclear power. They showed him cities radiant with a light that seemed to come from no source he could identify, technologies that defied his comprehension, and a sense of history stretching far beyond human memory. When he was returned to his aircraft, dazed and shaken, he was told to carry their warning back to the surface world. Whether these diaries are genuine or elaborate fabrications remains debated, but they form a key piece in the puzzle that surrounds Operation High Jump. At the heart of these stories lies a recurring theme: guardianship. Whether one believes in extraterrestrial civilizations hidden beneath Antarctica, descendants of lost cultures like Atlantis, or secret military forces operating in white camouflage, the pattern is the same. A boundary exists, and when humans approach it, they are confronted, diverted, or warned. The alleged flying discs that shadowed Bird's fleet, the strange interference with navigational instruments, the sudden appearance of storms, all can be seen as defensive actions, designed not to destroy, but to repel. The Guardians, whatever form they take, seem to operate by a rule of silence and intimidation rather than open warfare. Of course, skeptics point to simpler explanations. The Antarctic is a place of extremes, where storms can arise without warning, where cold and fatigue distort perception, and where isolation fosters paranoia. Aircraft accidents and equipment failures are natural in such a hostile environment, they argue, and Bird's comments about new lands could have referred to uncharted ice shelves or misunderstandings in translation. The so-called secret diary might be nothing more than a hoax circulated decades later, yet the persistence of the stories, their survival across generations and cultures, suggests that something more than mere misperception may be at work. What cannot be denied is the atmosphere of secrecy that descended after High Jump. Bird, once an outspoken figure, grew increasingly cautious in his public statements. The expedition's sudden termination was never fully explained, leaving behind a vacuum filled with speculation. In 1959, little more than a decade later, the Antarctic Treaty was signed, placing strict limits on exploration, banning military activity, and declaring the continent a preserve for science. Officially, this was a triumph of international cooperation during the Cold War, a rare moment when rival superpowers agreed to set aside conflict. But to those who remember the strange tales of High Jump, the treaty looked like something else: a cover-up, a pact not to reveal what lay beneath the ice. The legacy of Operation High Jump endures because it embodies the tension between what is known and what is withheld. It presents us with a story where official records tell one tale and whispered recollections tell another, where the truth may lie buried in ice as deep and inaccessible as the continent itself. Whether Bird glimpsed hidden lands, or only the illusions of snow and sky, whether his men encountered advanced craft, or only the chaos of storms, the fact remains that Antarctica became different after High Jump. It became a place not merely of exploration, but of prohibition. Not only a land of science, but a landscape of secrets. To step into this narrative is to step into a fog where history and myth blur together. The image of metallic disks hovering over icy seas, of giants frozen in caverns, of diaries filled with warnings, all of these merge into a tapestry woven not just of fact, but of longing, fear, and imagination. And at the center of that tapestry is the sense that humanity brushed against a boundary, that in one of the last untouched corners of Earth, we were reminded that not everything belongs to us. Operation High Jump, whether a failed military exercise or an encounter with guardians beyond comprehension, remains a threshold story, a reminder that sometimes the most important part of history is what we are not permitted to know. In the years that followed Admiral Bird's return, Antarctica remained a place of rumors and silence, where every expedition seemed to carry back not just samples of ice and data on weather, but whispers of encounters that refused to fade. Scientists stationed at lonely outposts told stories that never appeared in their official reports, stories shared in low voices over radios or scribbled into private journals. One Chilean team, working in the mid-1960s, described seeing towering shadows encircling their camp as twilight descended across the endless white. They were silhouettes without detail, larger than any human, moving slowly but deliberately, as though testing the courage of those who watched. The men radioed for help, their voices tight with fear. But when questioned later, officials dismissed their account as nothing more than an optical illusion, tricks of the Antarctic twilight, where the low sun stretches and distorts every figure. Yet the scientists insisted they had seen something real, something that stood and moved with intention, then vanished as if swallowed by the snow itself. Others reported signs even more unnerving. Tracks in the snow, large human-like footprints, would appear overnight near camps, only to stop abruptly, as though the maker had lifted itself into the air or melted into nothingness. Researchers learned to photograph them quickly, for within hours the relentless wind would erase all evidence. Some footprints measured twice the length of a human step, with impressions so deep that they must have been made by something heavy, powerful, not merely drifting ice or collapsing snow. No known animal in the Antarctic wilderness could leave such marks, and yet no one ever saw the beings who made them. There were also reports of machinery faltering under strange conditions. Generators that had been reliable for weeks suddenly refused to start. Radios that had transmitted perfectly clear signals filled with static or silence when certain areas were approached. Compasses spun wildly, not only near the known magnetic anomalies, but in regions where no such disturbance should have existed. Pilots flying near forbidden zones found their instruments glitching all at once, as if an unseen hand had reached into the cockpit and shaken the delicate needles. Most of the time, systems recovered once they retreated, as though crossing back over an invisible boundary. For the men who lived these moments, the sensation was unmistakable. They were being warned away. In the 1970s and 80s, more stories began to surface from both military and civilian sources. A few came from Soviet scientists at Vostok Station, an outpost perched above a lake buried 2 miles beneath the ice. Late at night, some of them claimed they would see distant figures standing on ridgelines, unmoving, silhouettes that seemed to observe rather than approach. At first, they believed these were illusions caused by exhaustion, but when multiple witnesses described the same shapes on different nights, unease grew. One man swore he saw a pale face with eyes reflecting the starlight, before it disappeared behind a ridge. The official line remained silence. Nothing unusual was reported in the documents, but in private conversations, the scientists admitted they felt constantly watched, as though their work was being tolerated rather than ignored. American personnel at McMurdo Station spoke of similar feelings. While some chalked it up to isolation and the strange psychology of life at the edge of the world, others were convinced they were not alone. They told of hearing low vibrations at night, sounds that seemed to hum through the ice itself, resonances that made equipment rattle and left men unable to sleep. Sometimes these vibrations rose to an almost audible roar, then ceased instantly, leaving only the thundering silence of Antarctica behind. No natural source was ever identified. Perhaps the most dramatic stories came from pilots. In 1997, a U.S. Navy flyer admitted that he had strayed beyond a designated no-fly zone during a routine patrol. Almost immediately, he was intercepted not by fighter jets but by glowing white spheres that appeared beside his plane without any detectable approach. They did not attack, but matched his speed and position with eerie precision, escorting him until he had crossed back into permitted airspace. The pilot described the experience as both terrifying and oddly reassuring, as though the spheres were less interested in harming him than in shepherding him back to safety. Upon landing, he was interrogated by superiors and warned never to speak of what he had seen. But years later, under anonymity, he told his story, adding another piece to the growing mosaic of encounters. Even whispers from special operations units emerged, carried by men who spoke only after leaving service. One, identifying himself only as Brian, claimed his team had been sent to investigate a cave system deep in the Transantarctic mountains. Inside, they found colossal pod-like structures housing humanoid giants frozen in ice, each over 15 feet tall. Their skin, or what looked like armor, was pale, ridged, and ancient, as though crafted for a world harsher than ours. Before the team could record proof, higher-ranking officials arrived, sealed the cave, and silenced the mission. Whether Brian's account is invention or truth, its imagery lingers, amplifying the sense that Antarctica is less a barren land and more a vault of secrets. Then came the sailors' tales of the Ningan, enormous white beings glimpsed beneath Antarctic waters by Japanese whaling crews in the early 2000s. They described shapes 90 feet long, pale skin, limbs like arms, and faces disturbingly human. These encounters always ended the same way. The creature slipped beneath the ice again, vanishing without trace, leaving behind only fear and speculation. Was it a new species of whale, unknown to science? Or was it another form of guardian, patrolling the oceans as its counterpart stalked the land? Through all these stories runs a pattern. Presence without explanation, warnings without words, evidence that vanishes as quickly as it appears. The Antarctic becomes less a blank spot on the map and more a stage where unseen actors keep their distance, yet control the boundaries of what we may know. The governments of the world maintain their silence, enforcing treaties, restricting access, blurring satellite images, and grounding unauthorized explorers. And with every act of silence, the legend of the ice wall guardians grows louder. For those who have never set foot on the ice, the stories are easy to dismiss. Shadows, storms, illusions, each account can be explained. But for those who have stood in the frozen night, who have seen footprints vanish into nothing or machines fail for no reason, the truth is harder to shake. They return convinced of one thing above all else: Antarctica is not empty. Something watches, something guards, and whatever it is, it has chosen to remain just beyond our reach. If the Guardians truly exist, what are they? This is the question that haunts every fragment of testimony, every blurred photograph, every whispered recollection from the men and women who claim to have seen them. No single description is ever quite the same. Yet the similarities are too striking to ignore. Witnesses often begin with their size because it is the most impossible detail to overlook. Some say the beings were just taller than an ordinary man, perhaps 7 or 8 feet in height, while others insist they loomed far greater, 12 feet, 15 feet, giants that dwarfed the very snowbanks they moved across. To meet such a figure in the howling emptiness of Antarctica is to feel one's own scale collapse, as though standing before a creature designed for a harsher, older world. Those who dared to look longer speak of skin so pale it seemed carved from ice itself, shimmering with a faint blue tint under the weak Antarctic sun. Some describe it as bare flesh, smooth and translucent like frozen quartz, while others argue it looked more like a kind of armor, a biological suit perfectly adapted to the cold. This ambiguity, the question of whether they are clothed or simply born that way, adds to the sense that the Guardians are not merely life forms but something deliberately constructed. A few accounts go further, suggesting the skin could shift in tone, blending seamlessly into snowdrifts and glaciers, rendering the beings nearly invisible until they chose to move. Hair is another recurring detail. Long white strands flowing in the wind, sometimes described as fur, sometimes as mane-like locks, covering shoulders or streaming from skulls. It lends them an ancient quality, as though they are remnants of some primordial age when giants still walked the earth. Their faces, though seldom seen clearly, are what linger in memory. Witnesses describe broad features, human in outline, yet too sharp, too exaggerated. Eyes that glow faintly in the darkness, not blazing like fire but reflecting like those of a predator caught in torchlight. Some swear the eyes emit their own dim radiance, pale blue or silver, piercing through snowstorms with unblinking intensity. But appearance is only part of the enigma. Behavior tells an even more unsettling story. Guardians rarely reveal themselves openly. More often they are glimpsed at the edge of vision, half concealed by fog or storm, vanishing when approached. Their silence is absolute. They do not call out, do not answer, do not chase. They watch. Always they watch. The effect is one of psychological pressure rather than direct threat, an intrusion into the most primal part of the human mind that senses being observed. Explorers describe sudden feelings of dread, as though they had stepped into a place not meant for them, a trespasser beneath an unseen gaze. When intruders ignore the silent warning, stranger events occur. Sudden storms rise from clear skies, winds shrieking out of nowhere, snow blinding and relentless. Men report stumbling through blizzards that seem to circle only their camp, while nearby regions remain calm, as if the weather itself had been weaponized. Electronic devices falter, compasses spin uselessly, GPS trackers fail to lock, radios fill with static. Entire vehicles grind to a halt, their engines dead without cause, only to recover hours later once the group has retreated. Some survivors speak of low-frequency vibrations that seemed to pulse from nowhere, resonating through their very bones, forcing panic before fading as quickly as they came. And then there are the sounds, rarely heard, but unforgettable. Deep, resonant roars that seem to rise not from throats but from the ice itself, echoing across valleys and ridges until every man in earshot trembles. The roars carry no language, only command. More chilling still are accounts of voices not spoken aloud, but heard inside the mind, brief messages etched directly into thought. "You do not belong here." That phrase recurs again and again in testimonies from different decades, in different tongues, yet carrying the same meaning. If true, it suggests intelligence, not just instinctive guardianship, but deliberate communication. The question then arises: what exactly do they guard? Some witnesses believe the guardians are territorial, protecting specific caverns, ridges, or stretches of ice that conceal entrances to something hidden below. Others think they defend the continent as a whole, enforcing boundaries laid down long before humanity arrived. The defensive tactics, storms, interference, intimidation, point toward a strategy not of conquest, but of preservation, as though their mission is not to harm, but to repel. Even the most extreme reports of direct confrontation describe non-lethal force. Beams of light that disorient, sonic blasts that drive men to flee, never acts of outright slaughter. It is as though they have been tasked not with destruction, but with keeping the secret intact. Skeptics argue, of course, that these traits are stitched together from myth, folklore, and the human tendency to shape fear into form. A shadow glimpsed in fog becomes a giant. A trick of the wind becomes a voice. Malfunctioning electronics become evidence of a hidden power. Yet if one listens closely across decades of testimony, the pattern emerges with uncanny clarity. These are not random hallucinations. They are a mosaic of consistent traits: great size, pale skin, glowing eyes, silence, control of storms, warnings delivered in ways no human can replicate. It is a portrait of guardianship built from 1,000 fragments. What unsettles most is the suggestion that the guardians are not just passive relics of the ice, but active participants in shaping who may approach and who must retreat. The Antarctic Treaty, signed by nations that otherwise shared little but rivalry, takes on new weight in this light. Was it merely a human decision to preserve fragile ecosystems? Or was it a recognition that something already enforced the rules far more effectively than any government could? Those who favor the latter view argue that our leaders encountered the guardians and chose secrecy over confrontation, presenting the treaty as a shield of diplomacy, while behind it lurked an older, stranger arrangement. Whether myth or reality, the image of the guardian remains haunting. A towering figure cloaked in snow, skin the color of frozen light, eyes reflecting the storm, standing silently at the threshold of the world. To imagine such a being is to feel the weight of our own fragility, to sense that beyond the known edges of the map, forces greater than us may still keep their vigil. And perhaps the most disturbing thought is not that they exist, but that they have been here all along, watching, waiting, and deciding how close humanity may come to truths buried beneath the ice. The question of origin shadows every story of the ice wall guardians. To describe what they look like or how they behave is unsettling enough, but to ask where they come from is to step into a labyrinth of speculation, myth, and uneasy history. For some, the guardians are simply another chapter in the long human tendency to imagine sentinels at the edge of the world, like dragons once drawn on the margins of medieval maps. But others believe their presence is too consistent, their traits too specific, to be dismissed as invention. And so theories emerge, each more provocative than the last. The first theory, perhaps the most widely circulated in modern times, is that the Guardians are extraterrestrials who arrived in Antarctica long before humans ever ventured there. Their pale, elongated appearance, their mastery of storms and energy, their ability to communicate without words. These details echo reports of so-called Nordic aliens described in UFO encounters around the world. The Nordics, tall and fair, are said to be benevolent watchers, warning humanity about nuclear self-destruction. Admiral Bird's alleged diary fits seamlessly into this narrative. He encounters towering beings beneath the ice. They warn him of mankind's dangerous path, and then they vanish, leaving only their message behind. If this theory is true, then Antarctica is not just a continent of ice, but a base, perhaps a fortress, constructed by visitors from the stars, hidden in plain sight at the bottom of the Earth. A second theory dives not into the skies above, but into the depths of history itself. According to this view, the Guardians are the descendants of an ancient human civilization, one erased from the surface world but preserved beneath the ice. Atlantis is the name most often whispered, a city described by Plato as mighty and advanced before being swallowed by the sea. Could survivors have fled southward, hiding their knowledge in Antarctica, which at the time may not have been the frozen desert we know today? Geological studies hint that the continent once supported forests and rivers millions of years ago, its climate temperate and habitable. If an advanced culture had thrived there, the sudden onset of glaciation could have driven them underground, where they remain, their sentinels patrolling the ice above. The Guardians, then, would not be aliens but kin, our own ancestors, protecting a secret heritage from the eyes of their distant descendants. Still another theory weaves theology into the snow. In ancient texts, particularly in the Book of Enoch and other apocryphal writings, there are tales of the Nephilim, giants born of the union between angels and humans, punished for their corruption and bound in darkness until the end of time. Some believers argue that Antarctica, isolated and sealed in ice, was chosen as their prison. The towering figures seen by explorers are not benevolent watchers, but exiled beings, condemned to wait beneath the frozen continent, their purpose now twisted into guardianship, not by choice, but by curse. When witnesses describe their immense size, glowing eyes, and terrifying presence, these accounts align eerily with descriptions of the Nephilim in ancient tradition. Whether one accepts scripture as history or not, the idea that the Guardians are remnants of a biblical age carries its own dark allure. There are also those who turn not to the heavens or the past, but to human ambition itself. During the 1930s, Nazi Germany sent expeditions to a region of Antarctica they named Neuschwabenland. Officially, they mapped coastlines and studied resources. Unofficially, conspiracy theories claim they built bases beneath the ice, experimenting with advanced technologies and even genetic engineering. After the war, stories spread of Base Tuatoven, a secret Nazi stronghold hidden in the mountains, where scientists continued their work far from Allied eyes. According to this theory, the Guardians may not be aliens or ancient beings at all, but engineered soldiers, mutants designed for extreme conditions, products of science pushed beyond morality. Some suggest these creations survived, inherited by later powers like the United States or the Soviet Union, who continued experiments in secrecy. The idea is chilling. Guardians as human inventions, now beyond control, roaming the very land they were built to protect. Connected to this are speculations about modern militaries. The Guardians, some argue, are not supernatural at all, but elite units from world powers, equipped with advanced white camouflage suits, exoskeletons, and experimental technology. To ordinary explorers, such soldiers could appear gigantic, silent, and otherworldly, especially in the disorienting conditions of snow and storm. Their mission would be straightforward: keep unauthorized personnel away from restricted zones, intimidate with displays of power, and vanish before questions could be asked. This explanation seems the most plausible to skeptics, but it raises another question. What exactly is so valuable in Antarctica that entire militaries would dedicate resources to guarding it in such secrecy? Even more speculative voices suggest that the Guardians are not beings at all, but something stranger: projections, energy forms, or even the land itself manifesting in shapes we interpret as humanoid. The electromagnetic anomalies, the sudden storms, the eerie sense of being watched. Perhaps these are not signs of creatures, but of a planetary defense system embedded deep within Antarctica. In this sense, the Guardians could be guardians in the most literal form, the Earth itself creating protectors from its own ice and energy, figures that are neither alive nor dead, but manifestations of a will to remain hidden. What binds all these theories together is the sense of guardianship, the idea of a boundary deliberately maintained. Whether aliens, Atlanteans, Nephilim, engineered soldiers, or elemental manifestations, the Guardians exist in human imagination because they answer the question that hangs over Antarctica. Why is this vast continent so restricted, so controlled, so carefully shrouded in silence? Myths flourish where answers are forbidden, and in the blinding snow, myths take shape as towering figures, pale and watching. It may be that the Guardians are nothing more than shadows and fear. It may also be that they are something real, woven into our history, erased from our records, yet alive still in the most remote place on Earth. Each theory offers a glimpse, a possibility, but none offer closure. Instead, they leave us with the haunting certainty that Antarctica is not simply empty. Whatever its truth, it is guarded. And perhaps as each generation adds new stories to the growing legend, the Guardians are less a question of whether they exist, and more a reflection of what humanity most fears: the possibility that some boundaries are not ours to cross. By the end of the 1950s, the murmur of strange sightings, Admiral Bird's cryptic interviews, and the quiet but urgent rumors that had trailed Operation High Jump had left the world with questions it could not easily answer. And then, almost suddenly, an answer arrived, not in the form of revelation, but in the form of restriction. In December 1959, 12 nations signed what became known as the Antarctic Treaty. On its surface, the treaty appeared as a triumph of peace, a rare moment when Cold War rivals, the United States and the Soviet Union among them, set aside suspicion to agree on one thing: that the frozen continent would be preserved for science, free of military bases, territorial claims, and commercial exploitation. To the public, it was a noble gesture, a promise to keep the last great wilderness untouched. Yet to those who had been following the undercurrents, the treaty looked less like a promise and more like a pact of silence. Why Antarctica, of all places? Other regions of the Earth were rich in resources, contested, even fought over. Yet here was a continent nearly twice the size of Australia, untouched and largely unexplored, suddenly declared off-limits. Nations that had little else in common agreed without hesitation. More than 60 years later, the treaty still holds, expanded now to over 50 signatories. No other place on Earth has been protected so thoroughly for so long by such unlikely allies. If the official explanation is to prevent environmental harm, then one might applaud the foresight. But skeptics cannot help but notice that these same powers have shown little hesitation in exploiting every other corner of the planet. Why here, and why with such unanimity? It is in this context that the strange visits of the 21st century gain their weight. In 2016, John Kerry, then U.S. Secretary of State, made an unexpected trip to Antarctica. The timing could not have been stranger. Election Day in the United States, one of the most pivotal in modern history. While his country chose its next president, Kerry was thousands of miles away, standing on the ice. Officially, the purpose was to highlight climate research and the dangers of global warming. But for many, the explanation rang hollow. Why leave Washington at such a critical moment? Why spend those days at the end of the world unless something else demanded his presence there? Something not listed on the press release. That same year, another figure made the journey. Patriarch Kirill, leader of the Russian Orthodox Church. He traveled to bless a small church built at one of the Russian bases, but the symbolism of such a visit raised eyebrows. What would drive one of the most powerful religious figures on the planet to endure the journey to Antarctica? Some whispered of hidden rituals, ancient relics, even an attempt to reconcile faith with secrets lying beneath the ice. It seemed strange that the spiritual shepherd of millions would suddenly find himself at the southern pole of the Earth, performing ceremonies in a place where almost no one lives. Unless perhaps those ceremonies were meant not for human witnesses, but for something else entirely. And then came the story of Buzz Aldrin, the American astronaut who had walked on the moon. In 2016, he, too, traveled to Antarctica, only to be evacuated shortly afterward due to what officials described as a medical emergency. Soon after, unverified reports spread online claiming Aldrin had seen something terrifying on the ice, something he allegedly called pure evil. Though these claims were quickly dismissed, and though Aldrin himself never publicly confirmed them, the mere coincidence of his sudden illness and abrupt departure was enough to ignite speculation. Why was a man whose life had been spent on the frontiers of exploration drawn to Antarctica in the first place? What could he have hoped to see there, or been warned against seeing? Even outside these high-profile visits, the continent seems to attract an unusual degree of interest from the powerful and the connected. Heads of state, business magnates, religious leaders, all have, from time to time, found reasons to journey southward, their trips couched in the language of science or diplomacy, but cloaked in suspicion. To ordinary observers, Antarctica is a frozen wasteland, a place of penguins, icebergs, and research stations. To those who watch more closely, it appears to be a stage for something else: secret meetings, hidden discoveries, agreements made not for the world but away from it. The secrecy is not confined to visitors. No-fly zones dot the continent, places where aircraft are forbidden to pass without explanation. Pilots speak of restricted corridors and areas where navigation systems falter without warning. Satellite images available to the public show vast swaths of Antarctica in low resolution, blurred or missing altogether. Officially, these are technical glitches, gaps in coverage, or artifacts of image stitching. Unofficially, they are exactly what one would expect if something important was being concealed. To many, the pattern is unmistakable. Restrictions on the ground, restrictions in the air, restrictions even from orbit. The Antarctic Treaty, then, is not just a legal document. It is the architecture of silence, a structure that ensures the continent remains locked away, its secrets kept behind layers of law and protocol. When viewed through this lens, the treaty ceases to look like environmental protection and begins to resemble an agreement with the guardians themselves, whether those guardians are alien, ancient, or human in origin. Perhaps the nations of the world, confronted by something they could not control, chose instead to cooperate in hiding it. Rather than risk confrontation, they built a barrier of bureaucracy around a barrier of ice. To this day, the Antarctic Treaty remains one of the most remarkable documents of modern history. Its success is measured not in what it allows, but in what it prevents. And what it prevents, above all else, is ordinary human eyes from wandering too far, seeing too much, or asking questions that cannot be answered. As long as the treaty stands, Antarctica will remain the most controlled wilderness on Earth, a continent that belongs to no one, and perhaps to something else entirely. When people speak of Antarctica as the world's last frontier of secrecy, the conversation almost always turns to bases, some real, some rumored, some buried so deeply in speculation that they have become modern folklore. Among these, none looms larger than the story of Base 211. In the late 1930s, Nazi Germany dispatched expeditions to a stretch of the Antarctic coast they named Neuschwabenland. Officially, the missions were about mapping and resource surveys, but rumors persist that the Third Reich had other ambitions. Some claimed they were searching for uranium, others that they were scouting a remote fortress far beyond the reach of enemy powers. What captured the imagination of later generations, however, was the claim that beneath the ice the Nazis established a secret installation, Base 211, complete with underground hangars, workshops, and experiments and technologies decades ahead of their time. At the end of the war, whispers spread that some of Hitler's most devoted followers had escaped, vanishing not to South America, as commonly believed, but to the Antarctic. There, it was said, they continued their work, developing flying saucers and other machines inspired by discoveries made in hidden caverns. These stories intensified after Operation High Jump ended in confusion. To conspiracy-minded observers, Bird's fleet had not simply encountered weather. It had stumbled into a confrontation with remnants of Nazi power sheltered under the ice, perhaps even allied with something not human. Whether this is truth or fantasy, the idea of Base 211 remains one of the most enduring myths of the frozen continent, a story where ideology, science, and the supernatural intertwine. As the Cold War unfolded, Antarctica became home to a new wave of bases, this time under the banners of rival superpowers. The United States established McMurdo Station on Ross Island, a sprawling complex that remains the largest community on the continent. Officially, it is a hub of scientific research, but rumors linger of tunnels extending below, of hidden facilities shielded from civilian eyes. Some visitors speak of areas within the base that are strictly off-limits, even to those stationed there, doors guarded not by locks, but by silence. Could McMurdo conceal laboratories where technology recovered from the ice, or from encounters with the Guardians, was studied in secret? No evidence exists to prove it, yet the mere suggestion resonates. For where secrecy thrives, suspicion follows. The Soviets, for their part, built Vostok Station, perched above one of the most mysterious features of Antarctica, Lake Vostok. Buried beneath nearly 4 kilometers of ice, this hidden lake remained untouched for millions of years, sealed away from the world. When Russian scientists began drilling toward it in the late 20th century, anticipation grew. Here was a chance to discover organisms unaltered since ancient times, a window into the planet's distant past. But in 2012, as the drill came close to piercing the final layers of ice, the work was abruptly halted. Officials explained it as environmental caution, a need to prevent contamination. Yet others whispered of stranger reasons, that instruments had detected structures too regular to be natural, or signals too precise to be geological. If something ancient or artificial lay beneath Lake Vostok, the decision to seal the borehole would make perfect sense, not as protection of the environment, but as protection of a secret. Even beyond McMurdo and Vostok, smaller bases across the continent fuel their own rumors. Some say American stations are connected by underground tunnels invisible from the surface, allowing secure transfer between facilities without detection. Others believe Soviet installations masked deeper caverns where equipment far stranger than climate monitors was tested. The harshness of the Antarctic environment makes such stories hard to confirm or deny. Few outsiders are ever permitted access, and those who see only what they are shown. The rest remains locked behind restricted zones, official denials, and the endless veil of ice. If we imagine for a moment that these bases do conceal secrets, what kind of secrets might they be? The possibilities divide into 2 broad categories. In one, the bases guard discoveries of ancient origin, ruins of a lost civilization, artifacts buried long before the first ice sheet formed, or even entrances into a hollow world below. In the other, the bases harbor human technology, but technology so advanced it defies current understanding. Recovered craft, experimental energy sources, weapons capable of manipulating weather or mind. In either scenario, the Guardians emerge as part of the same story, their silent patrols ensuring that no unauthorized eyes glimpse what lies hidden below. The fascination with bases also reveals a deeper human truth. We fear what governments hide from us. A place as vast as Antarctica, where so little can be seen or verified, becomes the perfect screen upon which to project our anxieties. If Area 51 serves as the American desert's mythic heart of secrecy, then Antarctica has become its polar counterpart, larger, more remote, and far more impenetrable. Where the Nevada desert can at least be approached by car, the frozen South is locked away by treaties, by storms, and by the sheer brutality of its environment. To many, this makes it the perfect vault, a place where the most disruptive truths could be stored, guarded, and quietly studied far from the eyes of the world. Consider, too, the timing. The Nazi expeditions of the 1930s, Bird's Operation High Jump in the 1940s, the Antarctic Treaty in 1959, The sudden surge of Cold War bases in the decades that followed all line up like steps in a sequence. Each generation seems to approach the continent, glimpse something unsettling, and then retreat into silence. The bases remain, their official purpose the pursuit of science, their unofficial aura one of concealment. Whether they guard secrets of history, technology, or something that blurs the line between the two, the effect is the same. Antarctica remains less a wilderness than a locked archive, its guardians both human and otherwise. In the end, the story of bases beneath the ice is not about proof, but about possibility. Each claim, Nazi fortress, Soviet tunnels, American laboratories, adds another layer to the mystery, another reason to believe that what lies under the continent is more than ice and rock. And if we accept that governments might indeed have found something there, then the question becomes not whether they are hiding it, but why. Is it because humanity is not ready to know? Or because what waits beneath the ice is not meant to be disturbed at all? The guardians, whether of flesh and blood or of law and secrecy, ensure that the answer remains beyond reach. And so the bases endure in rumor, silent monuments to the things we are not allowed to see. Antarctica is often described as lifeless, a frozen desert where nothing can survive but the hardiest of penguins and seals. Yet beneath the silence of its snowfields lies an ecosystem more alien than any other place on Earth, a world of anomalies that seem to resist ordinary explanation. And it is within these anomalies, these strange lakes, ancient microbes, and impossible landscapes, that the legend of the Guardians finds new strength. For if the continent can harbor life sealed away for millions of years, why not something else? Something older and more deliberate, hidden alongside it. Take Lake Vostok, buried beneath nearly 4 kilometers of ice. For more than 20 million years, it has been sealed off from the surface, a vast body of water untouched by light or air. When Russian scientists finally drilled near its surface, they found traces of microbial DNA unlike anything known. Some argued contamination explained it, but others believed they had uncovered organisms evolved in complete isolation since the age of dinosaurs. If such creatures can endure in darkness, evolving unseen, then who is to say larger beings could not also wait there, suspended in ice or concealed in hidden caverns? Some suggest the Guardians are not aliens at all, but the ultimate survivors of Earth, relics of ancient ages adapted perfectly to the cold, watching as humanity only now discovers their domain. Nor is Vostok the only strange feature. There are blood-red rivers staining the snow, such as the phenomenon known as blood falls, where iron-rich water emerges from deep beneath a glacier, glowing crimson as it seeps across the ice. To geologists, it is chemistry. To storytellers, it looks like a wound in the continent itself, a place where something long imprisoned leaks slowly into the open. Then there are the so-called dry valleys, stretches of land free of ice despite being surrounded by glaciers, their floors littered with strange stones and mummified remains of seals carried there by forces no one fully understands. Some theorists argue these valleys are entrances, natural gateways leading below the surface, their barrenness a clue to hidden systems of heat and energy rising from within. Magnetic anomalies, too, complicate the picture. Compasses in certain regions swing wildly, as though pulled by unseen currents. Satellites detect odd signatures beneath the ice, shapes that look uncannily like buried structures. One such anomaly lies near Lake Vostok itself, a vast oval form hundreds of kilometers wide, its outline too symmetrical to ignore. Officially, it might be a geological feature, but to those who connect dots differently, it is evidence of something artificial. Perhaps a forgotten city, perhaps the foundations of a base, perhaps the very seat of the Guardians themselves. Even life itself conspires to keep the mystery alive. Microbes have been revived from cores of ice over 500,000 years old, stirring back to activity as though time meant nothing to them. Some of these organisms bear little resemblance to known species, suggesting lineages that diverged deep in Earth's past. Scientists call them extremophils, but to others they are proof that the Antarctic holds not just survival, but persistence, a hidden biology that refuses extinction. If microbes can awaken after 500,000 years, why not larger forms, preserved in cryonic stillness until the right moment? The tales of frozen giants glimpsed in caves, their bodies encased in pods of ice, take on a darker plausibility in this light. There are even stories of entire subglacial mountain ranges, like the Gamburtsev Mountains, buried beneath the ice sheet. Mapped by radar, their peaks rise as tall as the Alps, yet no human eye has seen them directly. They exist as shadows on instruments, an entire landscape hidden below another. To imagine mountains concealed for millions of years is to realize how much else could lie beneath, untouched and unseen. Caves warmed by geothermal heat have also been discovered, vast hollow chambers beneath the ice where temperatures are mild enough to support plants, even entire ecosystems. If such environments exist, then it is no great leap for some to claim they could shelter advanced life, or ancient life, waiting far from the surface. It is this convergence of the natural and the mysterious that makes Antarctica unique. Unlike deserts or jungles, it hides its secrets completely, burying them in kilometers of ice, shielding them from satellites and explorers alike. Every anomaly discovered, red rivers, dry valleys, magnetic signatures, becomes fuel for speculation. And every fragment of evidence, no matter how small, fits neatly into the larger narrative of guardianship. What if these features are not random? What if the blood-colored streams, the valleys without ice, the subterranean lakes are signs not of chance, but of design? To believers, the landscape itself seems almost engineered, a labyrinth of traps and thresholds that both conceal and protect. Of course, science offers explanations, and those explanations are powerful. Iron oxidation explains blood falls, katabatic winds explain dry valleys, pressure and geothermal heat explain liquid lakes beneath the ice. Yet explanations do not silence the imagination. Instead, they sharpen it. For if nature can produce phenomena so strange and so alien on its own, then the line between natural wonder and deliberate concealment grows ever thinner. Perhaps the guardians are not separate from these features at all, but part of them, woven into the very fabric of the continent like ghosts of geology, emerging only when the boundary is threatened. To those who seek certainty, Antarctica is infuriating. It never answers directly. For every discovery, another question emerges. For every core sample, a mystery preserved within. It is as though the continent itself conspires to remain unknowable, a riddle written in ice. And standing at the edge of that riddle, watching, are the guardians, whether of myth, of biology, or of something else entirely. The anomalies of Antarctica remind us that the Earth can still surprise, that even in an age of satellites and science, vast realms remain hidden. And in those realms, anything is possible. For many who study the Antarctic mysteries, the most compelling accounts are not of footprints in the snow or silhouettes in the fog, but of things seen above, in the sky where nothing should fly. In a place so hostile, where even the most advanced human aircraft struggle against the winds, there have been repeated reports of machines, silent, glowing, impossibly fast, that appear and vanish without warning. These aerial phenomena, whether called UFOs, disks, spheres, or guardians, form a thread that runs through the entire story of Antarctica. The earliest and most infamous of these reports came from Operation High Jump. Sailors spoke in whispers of objects shaped like disks, hovering over the icy waters, darting in and out of clouds at speeds that mocked the capabilities of 1940s aviation. Some claimed these craft fired beams of energy, light so intense that it seemed to disable instruments, sending men scrambling in confusion. Official reports dismissed the damage as accidents, the chaos as bad weather. But those who were there insisted something else had forced the fleet to retreat. Their stories were passed down quietly, from veteran to family member, fueling the sense that Antarctica was guarded not only from the ground, but from the skies. Decades later, another account surfaced from a U.S. Navy pilot in 1997. During a routine flight near restricted zones, his plane strayed off course. Almost immediately, two glowing white spheres appeared beside him. He described them as smooth, featureless, radiating a faint, steady light, moving without sound. They kept perfect formation with his aircraft, matching every maneuver, every change in altitude, as though herding him away. He tried to make radio contact, but his transmission dissolved into static. When he turned back toward approved airspace, the spheres followed until he was clear of the zone, then vanished as if they had never been. The pilot reported feeling not threatened but controlled, as though his actions were being guided by something unseen. Upon landing, he was interrogated and warned never to speak of what had happened. For years he kept silent, but in retirement he shared his story, adding yet another puzzle piece to the growing tapestry. Even more dramatic are the accounts of lights that defy physics. Researchers stationed on the ice have described orbs darting across the sky at impossible speeds, then stopping abruptly, hovering motionless in the air before accelerating again. Unlike meteors, they change direction sharply. Unlike satellites, they appear close, low, and reactive. Some witnesses claimed the lights seemed to pulse in patterns, as though signaling or communicating, though the meaning was beyond interpretation. At times, these lights appeared directly above bases, lingering long enough for multiple observers to confirm their presence. And always, just before documentation could be secured, they were gone. The phenomenon is not limited to light. There are stories of strange craft with defined shapes, cigar-like vessels, triangles outlined by dim lights, even massive forms partially concealed by clouds. In 2004, a group of civilian contractors working at a remote station described seeing a metallic, disc-shaped craft emerging from the fog, hovering briefly above the ice, then darting into the distance with a burst of speed so sudden it seemed to vanish. Their report never reached official records, but fragments of their testimony leaked years later, each detail echoing older accounts. What makes these sightings uniquely chilling is their consistency with stories from other parts of the world. The white spheres escorting the pilot echo the Foo Fighters reported by World War II pilots in both Europe and the Pacific. Luminous globes that followed planes, sometimes playful, sometimes menacing, always unexplained. The silent discs hovering over Operation High Jump mirror descriptions from the deserts of New Mexico and the forests of Scandinavia. And yet, in Antarctica, these sightings carry an added weight: the remoteness of the continent, the absence of any human infrastructure to explain them, the strict treaties preventing open investigation. The skies above the ice are perhaps the most tightly controlled and least observed in the world, and in that vacuum of observation, anything might move unseen. Some theories suggest these craft are not alien at all, but advanced human technology tested in the most secretive environment imaginable. The Nazis, in this version, did not vanish at the end of the war, but carried their prototypes southward, developing saucers and other exotic machines in caverns beneath the ice. Later, the United States and Soviet Union may have seized these technologies, continuing the experiments in silence. If so, the glowing spheres and disks seen over Antarctica are not extraterrestrials, but the shadows of human ambition, guarded by secrecy rather than by otherworldly will. Yet this explanation raises its own problem. Why then do these craft behave as guardians, escorting intruders away, defending zones rather than flaunting power? Others hold to the extraterrestrial view. To them, the sky-born guardians are part of the same order as the pale giants glimpsed on the ground. Some suggest the craft are living beings themselves, not machines, but entities of light and energy, projections of intelligence that can shift form and purpose. In this telling, the guardians are not limited to one body or one shape, but are an entire spectrum of presences, from the giant in the storm to the glowing orb in the sky. Whether machines or organisms, they function with unity: repel, protect, conceal. Pilots who have encountered these phenomena often describe not only visual awe, but a strange emotional effect. One spoke of overwhelming calm, even as he was terrified. Another described a pressure in the mind, a sense that the spheres were aware of his thoughts. If true, this suggests not only technology beyond our own, but an understanding of consciousness itself, a means of communication that bypasses language and reaches directly into perception. It is here that the accounts blur most dangerously into the realm of the uncanny. Not just being watched, but being known. The night skies above Antarctica remain among the darkest and clearest on Earth, far from the light pollution of civilization. To stand there is to see stars burning sharp against the black, auroras rippling across the horizon in curtains of green and violet. And yet, in those skies, others have seen more. Disks where no plane could fly, lights moving with purpose, spheres that herd like shepherds guiding sheep. Whether alien, human, or something stranger still, these presences form part of the same pattern: the sense that the Antarctic is not empty, and that even the heavens above it are patrolled. And so, the legend of the Guardians extends upward, from the ice into the sky, transforming the continent into a threefold mystery: secrets beneath the ground, figures on the surface, and watchers above. To look up into the Antarctic night is to wonder if the stars are all that shine, or if among them move the sentinels of a boundary humanity was never meant to cross. Long before explorers etched the first maps of Antarctica, before even the idea of a frozen southern continent had settled into human imagination, there were already stories of giants cast down and locked away. In the pages of apocryphal texts, like the Book of Enoch, we read of beings called the Nephilim, offspring of angels who had defied the divine order by taking human wives. These children, enormous and mighty, were said to have filled the earth with violence and forbidden knowledge. Their presence was so disruptive that they were banished, imprisoned beneath the earth until the end of days. Some scholars interpret this as allegory, a myth to explain the existence of ruins too large for early humans to have built. But in the whispers of Antarctic lore, the Nephilim resurface, not as symbols, but as physical realities, guardians bound beneath the ice. Consider the parallels. Witnesses describe the guardians as towering figures, human-like yet distinctly other, their pale skin glowing in storms, their silence more terrifying than any roar. The Nephilim, too, were described as giants of unnatural origin, their existence a violation of natural order. In the story of Enoch, these giants were not destroyed but imprisoned in remote, desolate places, sealed away from humanity. And is there any place more desolate, more fitting for eternal confinement than the endless glaciers of Antarctica? To believers, the alignment is too precise to dismiss. What the explorers see in the blizzard, what the scientists glimpse at the edge of twilight, are not new beings at all. They are echoes of an ancient punishment carried forward through ages of ice. The Book of Enoch also speaks of the Watchers, angels who descended to earth and taught humanity forbidden arts, metallurgy, enchantments, astronomy. For their disobedience, they too were cast down, many bound in darkness. Some traditions suggest that their offspring, the Nephilim, were locked away beneath mountains and seas, their presence hidden yet enduring. If the guardians are real, then perhaps they are these very watchers, or their descendants, fulfilling a role they never chose. Wardens not of treasure, but of their own prison. Their silence, their reluctance to kill, their preference for intimidation, all could be seen not as mercy, but as necessity. They are not free to act beyond certain boundaries. They are chained not with iron, but with obligation. Across cultures, similar legends persist. In Norse mythology, frost giants roam the edges of the world, enemies of gods and men alike, lurking in realms of ice. In the Hebrew Bible, the Anakim and Rephaim, giant clans descended from ancient times, haunt the stories of conquest, being so large that the Israelites saw themselves as grasshoppers in comparison. In Greek myth, the Titans were bound beneath the earth after their defeat, their bodies buried deep in Tartarus, a prison hidden in shadow. Time and again, civilizations tell of immense beings, once powerful, now confined to places unreachable. Antarctica, locked behind treaties and ice walls, fits this archetype with eerie precision, as though myth and geography had finally converged. Some researchers go further, proposing that what we call mythology is in fact distorted memory, fragments of encounters with real beings whose existence was too overwhelming for ancient chroniclers to describe plainly. When early humans faced towering figures, glowing eyes, strange powers, what else could they conclude but that these were gods or angels? If the guardians are indeed remnants of such encounters, then every culture that spoke of giants may have been remembering the same truth, scattered across time and place. And Antarctica, the last hidden land, may be their final refuge, or their final cage. Even in the modern age, religious undertones cling to Antarctic mysteries. The visit of Patriarch Kirill in 2016 sparked theories that his journey was not a blessing of ice and stone, but of something older and darker. Some suggested he was there to perform rites of containment, prayers over a prison whose bars are not made of steel, but of snow. The coincidence of his visit with others, like John Kerry and Buzz Aldrin, only added fuel to the suspicion that beneath the ice sleeps something ancient, something that requires both political and spiritual acknowledgement. Skeptics, of course, see all of this as myth-making layered over the unknown. To them, the Nephilim are stories, no more real than dragons or cyclopes, and linking them to Antarctica is an act of imaginative desperation. But myth has always served as a vessel for memory, a way to carry fragments of truth across millennia. And if there is one place on Earth where myth and reality might overlap, it is in the continent we are least allowed to touch. The Guardians, whether angels bound, giants cursed, or simply beings beyond our categories, are living reminders that the old stories may not be as symbolic as we think. What unnerves most is the suggestion that their presence is not accidental. If they are indeed Nephilim, Watchers, or Titans imprisoned, then the guardianship is not self-chosen. They are there because something placed them there, because forces beyond comprehension decreed it. This transforms Antarctica from a mere frontier into something far stranger, a prison designed not by human hands, but by cosmic order. To trespass upon it is not only to risk the wrath of the prisoners, but to violate the sentence itself. And that, perhaps, is why governments remain silent, why treaties endure, why explorers are turned back. It is not secrecy for secrecy's sake, but obedience to a command older than nations, one written in myth yet enforced in ice. As night falls over the frozen plateau, as winds carve the snow into endless ridges, the thought lingers that somewhere beneath those glaciers, immense forms lie waiting, whether sleeping, watching, or simply enduring their exile. They embody the oldest fear humanity has ever known, that the giants are not gone, that the stories were not allegory, that the ancient prisoners still stir beneath our feet. And if the shadows seen at the edge of camps, the roars carried through the storm, the glowing eyes in the blizzard are real, then perhaps the legends were warnings all along. In Antarctica, where the boundaries of myth and reality collapse, the Guardians remind us that some exiles never truly end. If myth offers one path to explain the Guardians, then the skies offer another. For decades, reports of extraterrestrials have filled newspapers, radio waves, and now the endless corridors of the internet. Most accounts describe beings with immense eyes and fragile bodies, the so-called greys. But another strand of testimony persists, one that aligns with Antarctica's mysteries more closely than any other: the Nordics. Described as tall, pale, and often benevolent, these beings appear in stories from Europe, North America, and South America, always delivering messages about humanity's dangerous trajectory. They speak of nuclear destruction, ecological collapse, and the need to respect boundaries we do not yet understand. When explorers and pilots describe the ice wall guardians, the resemblance is uncanny. The Nordics, according to UFO lore, are humanoid, often taller than ordinary people, with skin so pale it seems luminous and eyes that glimmer like ice. They are said to radiate calm and authority, rarely engaging in violence, preferring instead to warn or redirect those who encounter them. This is almost word for word how many describe the guardians of Antarctica, towering figures who do not attack but repel, who communicate without sound, who stand as silent wardens rather than aggressors. The parallels are so striking that some researchers argue they are not two separate myths at all, but two names for the same presence: Nordics above us, guardians below us, both part of a continuum of watchers that humanity keeps rediscovering under different guises. Consider Admiral Bird's alleged encounter during his secret flight in 1947. In his supposed diary, he wrote of being guided to a hidden city beneath the ice, filled with advanced technology and tall, fair beings who spoke directly into his mind. They warned him of humanity's misuse of atomic power, urging restraint before it was too late. To UFO believers, this reads not like fantasy, but like a textbook Nordic encounter. These beings appear not to conquer, but to advise, their interest not in ruling humanity, but in ensuring we do not destroy ourselves. Yet, if their words were true, why bury themselves in the most remote corner of the Earth? Some suggest Antarctica was chosen precisely because it is inaccessible, a natural fortress where they could observe without interference. Skeptics push back, of course. They argue that the Nordic archetype is simply an idealized projection shaped by cultural expectations. In the Cold War years, when pale, tall figures of authority symbolized both power and danger, perhaps witnesses unconsciously fashioned their visitors in that image. But such psychological explanations cannot account for the sheer consistency of the reports, nor for the way they mirror accounts from regions as different as Brazil and Norway, Chile and Canada. Across decades and cultures, the same pale giants appear, delivering the same warnings, evading capture with the same eerie ease. When such patterns endure, coincidence begins to feel inadequate. If the guardians are indeed extraterrestrials, the question becomes, when did they arrive, and why Antarctica? Some theorists suggest they came in the deep past, perhaps thousands of years ago, and established subterranean bases beneath the continent's mountains and lakes. This would explain the strange radar images of geometric anomalies beneath the ice, as well as the reports of glowing craft emerging from nowhere. Others speculate that they did not arrive in the conventional sense at all, but have always been here, watchers assigned to Earth as part of some cosmic order, their outpost hidden in the coldest and most unreachable place. In this view, Antarctica is not simply a continent, but a sentry post, a frontier between human ignorance and cosmic knowledge. The technology attributed to them reinforces this view. The glowing spheres that escort pilots, the craft that disable instruments, the sudden weather shifts, all suggest a mastery of forces we do not yet understand. Our own militaries experiment with weather modification and electronic warfare, but the scale described in Antarctic encounters dwarfs human capacity. Storms that form from nothing, compasses that spin uncontrollably, vehicles that die and restart without cause. These are not tricks of psychology. They are demonstrations of control, as if the very fabric of environment can be bent at will. To those who see the Guardians as Nordics, these displays are not attacks, but deterrents, reminders of who truly commands the frozen South. There are also whispers of cooperation. Some claim that governments have long known of these beings, that the Antarctic Treaty of 1959 was not merely about science, but about secrecy, a way to ensure peace between humanity and the Guardians. According to this theory, agreements were made. We do not trespass too deeply, and they allow us to maintain the illusion of sovereignty. The presence of high-ranking officials in Antarctica, from John Kerry to Patriarch Kirill, is interpreted not as symbolic visits but as meetings, diplomatic rituals with those who hold real authority. Such ideas are speculative, of course, but they persist because they explain the otherwise inexplicable. Why does Antarctica remain so tightly sealed? Why do nations that quarrel elsewhere maintain unity there? Perhaps because the continent is not ours to claim. For believers, the Guardians embody both hope and fear. Hope, because if they are truly Nordic visitors, then we are not alone, and we are being watched over by beings who seek to prevent our worst mistakes. Fear, because their very secrecy suggests that humanity is not ready for the full truth, that some knowledge would shatter us before it saved us. Their silence may be protection, or it may be judgment, and we have no way of knowing which. And so the legend of the Guardians expands outward, connecting ice to stars, myth to modern UFO lore. Whether they are ancient prisoners or cosmic envoys, Atlantean survivors or Nordic aliens, the effect is the same. Antarctica becomes more than a continent. It becomes a mirror, reflecting back our deepest anxieties about who we are and what waits beyond us. To walk upon its surface is to tread the edge of something vast, to feel the weight of eyes not our own. And in the long nights when auroras sweep the sky, one cannot help but wonder if the shimmering lights are not only atmospheric displays, but messages, reminders that the Guardians are still there, still watching, still deciding what part of the truth humanity is allowed to see. Not every explanation of the Guardians turns toward myth or stars. Some insist the beings are not cosmic envoys, not fallen giants, but flesh and blood creations of human ambition. According to this view, Antarctica's mystery is not supernatural at all, but political, the product of experiments conducted in shadows where no one was meant to look. If we peel away the legends of Nephilim and Nordics, what remains is the unsettling idea that the Guardians are human inventions, deliberately designed to serve as wardens of the ice. The origins of this theory lead back to Nazi Germany, whose expeditions to Neuschwabenland in the 1930s still cast long shadows. Officially, these missions charted coastlines and dropped metal darts to mark territory. Unofficially, they fed the narrative of Base 211, a fortress hidden beneath glaciers where scientists pursued secret projects. Conspiracy lore claims the Nazis were obsessed with creating a new human form. Taller, stronger, adapted to extremes. Some say they blended primitive genetic engineering with occult ritual, seeking to resurrect the Aryan giants of their mythology. When war ended, whispers suggested their work had not vanished, but had been transplanted south, hidden in the ice with their most fanatical followers. From this seed, the idea of engineered guardians was born. During the Cold War, these rumors gained new dimensions. Both the United States and the Soviet Union established bases in Antarctica under the flag of research, but suspicion lingered that beneath the surface they pursued other agendas. The U.S., inheriting Nazi scientists through Operation Paperclip, had both motive and talent to continue experiments in biology and technology far from public scrutiny. Meanwhile, Soviet laboratories were known to probe extremes of physiology and psychology, searching for ways to create soldiers who could endure conditions unthinkable to ordinary men. Could Antarctica have served as the testing ground for such efforts? It would have been the perfect stage, isolated, inaccessible, and protected by treaties that ensured no prying eyes. Those who hold to this theory point to the Guardians' traits not as alien, but as enhanced. Their great size, perhaps the result of growth hormones or genetic manipulation. Their pale, armored skin, not a natural feature, but protective suits engineered for camouflage. Their control of electronics, not mystical power, but advanced electromagnetic weapons. Even the storms that rise suddenly could, in this telling, be the result of weather modification experiments, technologies rumored since the mid-20th century, tested in secret long before the public knew they were possible. The Guardians, then, would be elite soldiers wrapped in myth, their purpose not only to frighten explorers, but to guard installations too valuable to reveal. There are fragments of testimony that align disturbingly well with this interpretation. Contractors at Antarctic bases have described encountering zones sealed off by military personnel, places where civilians were forbidden. Some reported hearing machinery humming beneath the ice at night, sounds too steady and mechanical to belong to nature. A few even spoke of encountering figures who, when glimpsed closely, did not appear supernatural at all, but clad in advanced suits, taller, broader, but unmistakably human beneath the gear. These suits, white as snow and lined with reflective material, could easily be mistaken in blizzards for beings of another world. To an exhausted scientist, a soldier in such armor might look like a giant stepping out of the ice. The theory deepens when one considers the Antarctic Treaty itself. If the continent were only an ecological preserve, why would military presence be so tightly controlled, yet so quietly persistent? Perhaps, believers suggest, the treaty's true purpose is to hide not aliens but human projects, bioengineering, weapon tests, secret bases, that would outrage the public if revealed. By cloaking them in the language of myth, governments achieve two aims. They discourage curiosity, and they deflect suspicion. To say giants guard the ice sounds absurd. To say militaries test forbidden science sounds dangerous. Better to let the public chase phantoms than stumble too close to the truth. The Nazi connection persists because it offers both a villain and a narrative of continuity. Base 2111 becomes the origin point, the seed from which Cold War secrecy grew. Some stories even suggest that survivors of the Reich struck deals with powers like the U.S., trading knowledge for sanctuary. In this light, the Guardians could be not alien watchers, but remnants of human extremism, mutants or soldiers shaped by ideology, and hidden away where their existence would never destabilize the world. Yet there is a darker version still. What if the Guardians are neither aliens nor engineered humans, but hybrids? Projects born of contact between the two. Some theories claim that Nazi scientists encountered something beneath the ice during their expeditions, and that the Guardians are the result of experiments blending human and non-human material. Later, these projects were allegedly seized and continued by superpowers, hidden under Antarctic secrecy. The beings described, too human to be alien, too alien to be human, fit unsettlingly well into this narrative. Of course, skeptics argue all of this is fantasy, the kind of speculation that thrives when evidence is absent. They point out that genetic engineering in the 1930s or 40s was crude at best, that no known program could have produced giants roaming the snow. But skeptics also admit that Cold War powers did conduct secret experiments on mind control, on weather manipulation, on radiation. If such projects occurred openly, why not others conducted in the last place anyone could verify? The theory of human-made guardians is chilling because it places the responsibility squarely on us. If they are aliens, we are innocent observers of a mystery. If they are prisoners of myth, we are mere inheritors of legend. But if they are our own creations, then the guardians are not protecting Antarctica from us. They are protecting us from what we ourselves have unleashed. That thought may be more terrifying than any story of angels or aliens, because it means the true danger is not the ice or the beings within it, but the secrecy of human ambition, forever hidden in the white silence of the South. For most of us, Antarctica is little more than an image, a vast field of white dotted with penguins, broken by jagged mountains, stretching into infinity. Yet the reality of access to this land is tightly constrained, more controlled than almost any other place on Earth. Few realize how carefully the skies above it are monitored, how heavily its maps are censored, and how swiftly attempts to trespass are thwarted. The continent has become less a wilderness and more a fortress, its gates guarded not only by treaties and weather, but by a web of invisible boundaries. To many, these restrictions are the clearest evidence that something lies there which must not be seen. No-fly zones crisscross the polar skies, sections where aircraft are forbidden to pass, marked on charts but seldom explained. Official reasons cite safety, the remoteness, the harsh weather, the unreliability of navigation equipment near the pole. And yet, pilots tell stories that complicate the picture. Civilian aviators who strayed into these zones have reported being intercepted by unknown craft, or suddenly losing all radio contact until they turned back. Some describe instruments failing as though a curtain of interference had descended upon their cockpit. Others recall being escorted out by silent orbs of light, eerily similar to the glowing eagles reported decades earlier. These incidents never reach official reports, but among pilots the warnings circulate. Do not cross the lines drawn in the sky, because something will be there to meet you. The same pattern extends to satellite imagery. In an age where we can zoom into city streets from space, Antarctica remains strangely blurred. Large portions of its surface appear in low resolution, smudged as though through frosted glass, or absent altogether, replaced by white voids. Agencies explain this as a technical issue: limited passes of satellites, difficulty stitching images over reflective snow. But independent researchers point to the strange regularity of the blurred zones. Why should certain areas, often near supposed anomalies like Lake Vostok or mountainous regions, consistently lack clarity, while others are shown in detail? The suspicion grows that these are not accidents of imaging, but deliberate obfuscations. Patches placed to cover features that cannot be explained away. Every so often, an independent explorer tries to challenge these limits. Some attempt unauthorized flights, others plan overland journeys, determined to reach places marked off-limits. Their stories often end abruptly. In 2018, Russian adventurer Sergei Ananov tried to pilot a small helicopter toward Antarctica without official clearance. He was detained in Chile before ever reaching the ice, his mission halted under the pretext of safety violations. Others who launched expeditions with private funding found themselves stopped by naval patrols, their ships redirected or their permits revoked at the last moment. Officially, it is to prevent loss of life. Unofficially, it appears as if invisible hands move quickly to ensure no outsider reaches certain latitudes. There are accounts of explorers who pressed further than they should. Some tell of being shadowed by unmarked aircraft, sleek and featureless, that appeared over the horizon with no warning. Others claim their GPS devices began to malfunction once they approached restricted zones, leading them in circles until supplies forced retreat. A few return with photographs, blurry and inconclusive, showing odd structures or dark shapes against the ice, only to find their credibility destroyed when skeptics dismiss the images as illusions or camera faults. What matters is not the proof, but the pattern. Those who try to push beyond the accepted boundaries meet obstacles that defy coincidence. And yet, these very obstacles fuel the mythology. Every blurred satellite photo becomes a canvas for speculation. Every no-fly zone becomes a curtain hiding a stage. Every failed expedition becomes a parable of forbidden knowledge, of humanity knocking on a door that will not open. To believers, these patterns are exactly what one would expect if guardians, whether human, alien, or ancient, truly exist. The guardianship is not limited to the physical presence of pale giants or glowing spheres. It extends into bureaucracy, into technology, into the subtle hand of censorship that shapes what we are allowed to see. Skeptics again provide simpler answers. Blurred images are technical, no-fly zones are practical, intercepted explorers are protected from their own recklessness. And yet, the Antarctic is unique in its consistency. Other remote regions of Earth, from the Sahara to the Amazon, are filled with dangers and extremes, but none are so thoroughly controlled. None carry the same sense of being curated for public consumption, just enough shown to satisfy curiosity, never enough to invite real questions. In that gap between official explanation and lived perception, the guardians reappear, no longer only figures of myth, but symbols of systemic silence. For those who dream of discovery, the frustration is immense. Modern explorers are not limited by technology. They have drones, satellites, aircraft capable of reaching the pole with ease. What stops them is not ability, but permission. It is the treaties, the patrols, the blurred pixels on a screen. Antarctica has become the last blind spot in a world otherwise revealed, and blindness breeds imagination. Could there be caverns beneath those blurred zones? Structures hidden under the ice? Entire realms guarded by weather, by silence, by unseen watchers? The absence of answers only sharpens the questions. And so the story continues. Skies forbidden, maps obscured, explorers turned back. Whether these are coincidences of nature and necessity, or deliberate acts of concealment, the effect is the same. Antarctica remains untouchable, not only by geography but by design. The guardians may not always appear in snowstorms or glowing spheres. Sometimes they are bureaucrats stamping denial papers, satellites showing nothing but white, treaties written in diplomatic ink. Guardianship can take many forms, and in the end, all serve the same purpose: to keep the secrets of the ice sealed away, just beyond the reach of those who dare to ask. When the world thinks of Antarctica, it imagines scientists bundled in parkas, drilling ice cores, measuring winds, counting penguins. But in recent decades, the frozen continent has drawn visitors whose presence seems out of place, figures not usually associated with research or adventure. Their arrivals are brief, their reasons vague, and their timing uncanny. To some, these journeys are innocent photo opportunities. To others, they are signals of something far stranger. The possibility that the Guardians are not only watching us, but meeting us. One of the most discussed visits occurred in November 2016, when John Kerry, then U.S. Secretary of State, arrived in Antarctica on what was officially billed as a climate change tour. Cameras showed him bundled in red parkas, listening to scientists speak about melting glaciers and rising seas. The explanation was straightforward enough, yet the timing raised eyebrows. Kerry chose to travel to the most remote continent on Earth on Election Day, when his nation was locked in political upheaval. Why was one of America's highest-ranking diplomats, a man accustomed to maneuvering through crises, standing thousands of miles away from Washington at such a moment? Skeptics point to a simpler possibility, that the official story was cover, and that Kerry's real mission lay far from climate science, perhaps in a meeting with those who patrol the ice. That same year, another figure made the journey, Patriarch Kirill of Moscow, head of the Russian Orthodox Church. His visit was described as a pilgrimage, an act of blessing for a small wooden church built at one of Russia's Antarctic stations. Photographs showed him in ceremonial robes, holding crosses against a backdrop of endless white. To the faithful, it was a moving gesture of spiritual guardianship over even the most remote outpost of human presence. But others asked a different question. Why would a religious leader of such stature travel to the edge of the world, enduring hardships for a congregation of a handful? Theories multiplied, that he was there to perform a ritual of containment, to sanctify a land already home to other hidden beings. Some whispered that he had come not to bless the living, but to keep something else asleep beneath the ice. Buzz Aldrin, the Apollo 11 astronaut who had walked on the moon, added yet more intrigue when he too journeyed southward in 2016. His trip ended suddenly with a medical evacuation. Official reports cited health issues, nothing more. Yet soon after, rumors spread online that Aldrin had left behind cryptic remarks about having seen pure evil on the ice. Though these claims were never verified and may have been the product of hoaxes, they clung stubbornly to the narrative. Aldrin's abrupt illness and hasty departure lent them just enough plausibility to persist. If anyone would recognize something extraordinary, something out of place, it would be a man who had already gazed upon the earth from another world. Nor were these visits isolated. Over the years, various dignitaries and figures of power have made sudden, quiet trips to Antarctica. Prince Harry of Britain trekked across its ice fields as part of a veterans expedition, a journey framed as charity and challenge, but whispered about in darker tones. High-ranking military officials, CEOs of energy companies, even political leaders have flown southward, their schedules only partially explained. Few stay long, most appear briefly, their presence noted in passing before they vanish back into ordinary life. Yet each journey leaves behind the same question. What draws such people to such a place, unless it is something that cannot be discussed? Even scientists, those one might expect to be the most transparent of visitors, sometimes return with strange silences. Teams drill into subglacial lakes only to halt at the final moment. their reasons couched in terms of contamination, but their eyes betraying unease. Research projects launch with fanfare, then vanish into obscurity, their data never released. In 2012, a Russian team came within meters of breaching Lake Vostok after years of drilling, only to suddenly stop. Their official explanation, that they wished to preserve the pristine environment, satisfied some, but not all. Rumors circulated that instruments had detected signals or structures below, discoveries too disruptive to reveal. If the Guardians existed, this was exactly the kind of threshold they would not permit us to cross. Taken together, these visits and silences form a mosaic that looks less like coincidence and more like choreography. Religious leaders arriving to bless ice, astronauts collapsing at the pole, politicians flying in on days of global consequence, scientists halting projects just before success. Each piece alone can be explained. Together they sketch a picture of boundaries observed and enforced, of dialogues unspoken yet undeniably present. Some theorists suggest that the Guardians, if they are indeed extraterrestrial or ancient, have chosen limited contact with human leaders, not to reveal themselves fully, not to announce their presence to the world, but to ensure a controlled relationship with those who hold power. In this telling, the Antarctic Treaty is not only a pact between nations, but between species, a silent arrangement that humanity may explore only so far, ask only so many questions, and in return, the Guardians remain watchful but not hostile. High-profile visits, then, become acts of renewal, gestures of acknowledgement that the pact remains intact. Of course, there is another interpretation, one far more unsettling. What if these visits are not meetings, but warnings? What if those who travel south return, shaken not because of what they were told, but because of what they saw, glimpses of beings or technologies that confirm humanity is not alone, and that we are trespassers in a land already claimed? In that case, the smiles for cameras and polite explanations are disguises, veils drawn over experiences that cannot be spoken aloud. Whatever the truth, Antarctica remains the stage for these enigmatic pilgrimages, where the powerful go quietly and return more quietly still. Ordinary people are left with fragments, a blurred photograph, a sudden evacuation, a hurried explanation. Into that void, the myth of the Guardians steps once more, offering a framework for the inexplicable. Whether meetings or warnings, rituals or accidents, the effect is the same. The sense that beneath the ice lies something, or someone, that demands the attention of our most influential figures, and yet forbids them from ever speaking plainly. In the end, the question lingers: do these journeys represent dialogue, diplomacy, or dread? We may never know. But each time another plane carries another leader to the bottom of the world, the suspicion deepens that Antarctica is not merely a frozen wasteland. It is a place where secrets are tended, where myths and power intersect, where humanity brushes against boundaries it was never meant to cross. And perhaps those who visit return not with answers, but with silence. The silence of those who have stood before the Guardians and been reminded of how small we truly are. When people speak of secrecy, their minds often leap first to the Nevada desert, to a dry basin surrounded by mountains and barbed wire, where floodlights cut the night and guards patrol against invisible lines. Area 51 has become the symbol of conspiracy, a shorthand for hidden aircraft, alien craft, and experiments cloaked from public view. Yet those who look deeper into the patterns of silence and control begin to realize that Antarctica is the truer heart of global secrecy. If Area 51 is a locked room, Antarctica is an entire wing of the house, walled off, frozen, and guarded by forces far more subtle and complete. The parallels are uncanny. Both landscapes are barren, hostile to casual visitors, and both are ringed with laws, restrictions, and myths. In Nevada, the desert heat and government fences discourage trespassers. In Antarctica, it is the storms, the ice, and the Antarctic Treaty that form barriers. In both places, airspace is carefully controlled. Pilots who wander too close to Groom Lake are intercepted by jets or warned away by radio. In Antarctica, aircraft straying into forbidden zones encounter silence on the radio, instruments that falter, or even glowing spheres that guide them back. Each environment uses a different tool, but the effect is the same. The ordinary are kept away. The extraordinary remains hidden. Then there are the blurred images. Satellite maps of Area 51 long omitted the base entirely, or showed only patches of desert where hangars and runways actually stood. With time, glimpses emerged, but never the full picture. Likewise, Antarctica appears in pixels that dissolve into whiteness, swaths of land smudged or absent, always in regions linked to anomalies, subglacial lakes, magnetic signatures, mountain ranges buried in ice. Technology that reveals every detail of our cities falters in both places. The suggestion is clear. What is concealed there is not meant to be known. But the most striking similarity lies in the stories that flow outward. From Area 51 come tales of flying saucers, reverse-engineered craft, secret meetings between aliens and generals. From Antarctica flow tales of guardians, glowing spheres, hidden bases, frozen giants. In both cases, official silence amplifies the myths. Denials from authorities do not erase suspicion. They fuel it, creating a vacuum into which imagination rushes. And in both cases, the myths serve a purpose. They frighten some, entertain others, distract the curious, and in the end, ensure that the true activities, whatever they are, remain safely out of reach. Yet Antarctica differs in scale. Area 51 is a single installation, a few square miles in a desert. Antarctica is an entire continent, twice the size of Australia, its every corner locked away behind treaties and storms. No other place on Earth is so thoroughly shielded. Nations that quarrel over every other border stand united in keeping this land off limits. Where Area 51 is a fortress guarded by soldiers, Antarctica is a fortress guarded by laws, ice, and perhaps by the guardians themselves. If the desert base hides secrets of technology, the polar continent hides secrets of existence itself. It is also more universal. Area 51 belongs to one nation, its mysteries tied to American power. Antarctica belongs to no one, and thus to everyone, and that makes its silence even heavier. If secrets are buried there, they are not the property of a single government, but of a global compact, a conspiracy of nations that spans east and west, rivals and allies alike. This breadth is why some call Antarctica the Area 51 of the world. Where Nevada whispers only to America, the Southern Pole whispers to all of humanity, reminding us that some truths are withheld not for one people, but for all. The comparison extends even to cultural impact. Films, television, and novels have turned Area 51 into a trope, the archetype of secret bases. But increasingly, Antarctica has crept into these stories as well. Fictional accounts speak of alien cities beneath the ice, of pyramids jutting from glaciers, of ancient things thawing after ages of sleep. The continent has become a stage for cosmic horror and speculative science alike. Just as Area 51 symbolizes what the government knows and will not share, Antarctica symbolizes what the world itself conspires to keep hidden. In the human imagination, they are twins. One hot, one cold, one desert, one ice, both thresholds to the unknown. And yet, there is one final difference. Area 51, for all its secrecy, is not unreachable. Tourists drive to its perimeters. Satellite images capture its runways. Former employees sometimes speak, even if vaguely. Antarctica allows no such leaks. Its guardianship is absolute, reinforced by weather, distance, and bureaucracy. The very act of reaching it requires permission, funding, and endurance few can muster. And those who arrive see only what they are allowed to see. No fences are needed. The continent itself is the fence, an expanse so vast and deadly that curiosity cannot survive without compliance. Perhaps this is why the myths of the Guardians thrive there more than in Nevada. At Area 51, you can squint through binoculars at distant hangars, hoping to catch a glimpse. In Antarctica, you see nothing. Nothing but white, nothing but storm, nothing but silence. Into that void, imagination projects its greatest fears and hopes. Aliens watching us, giants frozen in caverns, secret governments making pacts. And whether these are fantasies or fragments of truth, the result is the same. Antarctica has become not just the Area 51 of the world, but something greater. The perfect canvas for humanity's suspicion, a continent-sized blind spot that ensures we will never stop asking what lies beneath the ice. If the Guardians are said to stand watch, then the question inevitably follows: what exactly do they guard? For some, the answer lies not in myths of angels or in sightings of strange lights, but in stone, geometry, and ruins, signs of a civilization long buried beneath the Antarctic ice. Over the past century, scattered images and testimonies have circulated, suggesting the presence of structures too deliberate, too symmetrical, to be natural. These are the whispers of pyramids in the snow, of walls and corridors preserved under glaciers, of cities frozen in time. And though mainstream science denies their existence, the very persistence of the stories suggests something lingers there, waiting to be uncovered. The most famous of these anomalies is the so-called Antarctic Pyramid. Photographs circulate online of a mountain rising sharply from the ice, its sides unnervingly even, its peak precise against the horizon. To geologists, it is nothing more than a nunatak, a rocky peak thrusting through the ice, sculpted by wind and erosion into its present shape. To others, its resemblance to Egyptian or Mesoamerican pyramids is too striking to ignore. How, they ask, could random geology produce such perfect symmetry in such an inhospitable land? Was this mountain once a monument, carved by human or non-human hands in an age before Antarctica froze? And if so, could other such monuments still lie entombed below, hidden from sight but preserved in ice as clear as glass? Radar surveys have deepened the intrigue. In several regions, instruments have detected shapes beneath the ice that appear rectilinear, angles too precise for natural formations. Some resemble vast walls, others hint at clusters of structures aligned in patterns. Official reports describe them as anomalies in the bedrock. but alternative researchers suggest they could be the remnants of cities, lost settlements that thrived in a time when Antarctica's climate was temperate, before the continent slipped into its frozen tomb millions of years ago. If these are truly ruins, then Antarctica may not be a wasteland at all, but the grave of a civilization older than history. Legends across the world seem to echo this possibility. Plato's Atlantis, described as an advanced culture drowned beneath the sea, has often been linked to Antarctica. Ancient maps, like the Piri Reis chart of 1513, depict parts of the southern continent with coastlines free of ice, as though their creators had access to knowledge from a time before glaciers covered the land. Could these maps be fragments of memory, passed down from sailors of a forgotten age? Could the pyramids of Giza, the temples of the Maya, and the megaliths of South America all be echoes of a single, global culture, one whose heart lies now beneath the Antarctic ice? Explorers have reported stranger things still. One group claimed to have found entrance-like cavities in the ice, vast openings that seemed to lead downward, their edges too smooth to be mere cracks. Another told of stumbling across stones carved with geometric patterns, exposed briefly during a rare melt before being buried again. Independent expeditions rarely last long enough to prove such claims, but the rumors cling stubbornly to the narrative. They suggest that Antarctica's ice is not only a shroud, but a vault, sealing away relics that, if revealed, would rewrite the story of humanity itself. The guardians, in this interpretation, are not random beings, but wardens of a heritage too disruptive to unveil. If cities or monuments lie below, they may hold technologies or knowledge that would shift the balance of the modern world. Advanced energy systems, ancient maps of the stars, records of a people who mastered science long before our recorded history began. Such treasures could undermine religions, governments, and economies in a single stroke. Better, then, to keep them hidden, to let the ice remain locked, and to assign watchmen, whether natural, engineered, or alien, to enforce the silence. Skeptics counter with geology. They argue that symmetrical mountains can and do form, that radar anomalies often mislead, that no credible evidence of artificial construction has ever been retrieved. To them, the Antarctic pyramids are illusions, the product of human pattern-seeking. Yet even as they dismiss, the allure grows stronger. After all, the Giza pyramids themselves were once doubted, the idea of ancient peoples constructing such marvels dismissed as fantasy until evidence forced acceptance. Might Antarctica one day force a similar revelation? For now, the pyramids and ruins remain the province of speculation. But in the collective imagination, they expand with every blurred satellite photo, every halted drilling project, every forbidden expedition. The idea of a lost city beneath the ice has become not just a possibility, but a symbol, the ultimate secret, the treasure hidden at the end of the world. And if the guardians exist, then perhaps they are not only sentinels of life, but custodians of memory, ensuring that a forgotten civilization sleeps undisturbed, its truths preserved until, or unless, humanity is ready. To walk across Antarctica is to walk across a frozen museum, its exhibits sealed in white walls kilometers thick. Somewhere beneath lie mountains unseen, valleys untouched, lakes unfrozen for millions of years. And perhaps, amid those shadows, walls of stone, corridors of geometry, monuments built by hands like ours or unlike ours still wait, The ice protects them. The treaty forbids them. The guardians ensure them. And we, locked outside, can only imagine what history's wait, silent and patient beneath the endless snow. If the frozen continent speaks, it does not do so in words. Its voice is deeper, stranger, a chorus of rumbles and tones that slip beneath the threshold of hearing. Scientists call them infrasounds, vibrations so low they can travel for hundreds of kilometers, passing through ice, stone, and flesh alike. To those who have spent long nights in the Antarctic wilderness, they are something else, the voice of the land, or perhaps the voice of what lies beneath it. For decades, expeditions have reported strange noises in the ice, sounds too rhythmic to be storms, too resonant to be accidents, as though the continent itself were alive and murmuring. In 2018, researchers published data from the Ross Ice Shelf, where seismic sensors picked up an eerie humming. The shelf vibrated constantly, producing tones like a colossal musical instrument. Wind sweeping across dunes of snow set the ice into resonance, generating a sound so low it was inaudible to the human ear, yet measurable by instruments. The discovery made headlines as a scientific curiosity. But to those already attuned to Antarctica's mysteries, it was confirmation of what explorers had whispered for generations. The ice sings, and its song feels like a warning. Some even claimed the vibrations seemed to intensify when people approached certain zones, as though proximity stirred the voice of a hidden presence. Others spoke of thunder without storms. Campers on remote expeditions told of booming echoes rolling through the valleys, deep cracks that sounded less like shifting ice and more like something vast moving below. At times, the sounds were accompanied by tremors, gentle shaking that rattled equipment, yet left seismographs strangely blank, as though the Earth itself had chosen not to record the disturbance. Scientists dismissed these as ice quakes, the groaning of glaciers grinding against bedrock. But to those who felt the vibrations resonate in their bones, the effect was unmistakably intentional. It felt like being addressed, not by words, but by force, a command issued in the language of fear. Then there are the mysterious skyquakes. Several teams have described sudden blasts of sound overhead, like explosions or roaring engines, though the skies above them were perfectly clear. Instruments recorded nothing, yet the noise left men shaken, clutching radios that had gone dead at the same moment. In 2016, satellite sensors detected inexplicable low-frequency waves rippling from Antarctica into the atmosphere, strong enough to circle the globe. The official explanation was shifting ice or volcanic activity beneath the continent. The unofficial whisper was simpler. Something beneath the ice had stirred, and the planet itself had carried the echo outward, as if warning the rest of the world. Even stranger are the reports of voices carried in the wind. Isolated researchers have confessed, years after their postings ended, that they heard whispers outside their tents at night. Words they could not quite understand, spoken in no known language, yet unmistakably structured. One scientist described it as a chorus of tones layered together, resonating in his skull until he nearly broke from exhaustion. Another said the voices always came just before equipment failed, as if heralding the disruption. To skeptics, this is the madness of solitude, the tricks of the mind in endless silence. To believers, it is the direct communication of the guardians, who speak not through mouths, but through vibration, carving messages into the deepest part of human awareness. Infrasound is known to affect the human body. Prolonged exposure can cause unease, dizziness, even visions. Paranormal researchers often cite it as the source of ghostly encounters, the unseen cause of fear in haunted places. Antarctica is filled with it. The wind across vast plains, the cracking of glaciers, the tremors of unseen forces. To live there is to dwell inside a constant sea of low frequencies. Perhaps the Guardians use this naturally occurring medium to communicate, amplifying it when necessary. Perhaps the very hum of the ice is their language, one we do not yet understand. Soviet accounts from Vostok Station hinted at similar mysteries. In the 1980s, personnel recorded strange pulses beneath the ice, regular and repeating, as though mechanical. Some believed they had detected geothermal events. Others wondered if the signals were artificial, resembling sonar more than natural tremors. If true, then the vibrations may not be geological at all, but the echoes of structures, vast machines buried in the dark, still functioning after millennia. Could the Guardians be linked to such machines, their power drawn from the beating heart of the continent itself? The phenomenon of resonance ties back to the oldest myths. In ancient traditions, sound was often linked to creation and power. The voice of God shaping the world, the chants of shamans bridging spirit and flesh, the music of the spheres governing the cosmos. If the Guardians exist, their command of vibration could be more than technology. It could be a mastery of the fundamental language of reality, a roar that disables machinery, a hum that terrifies intruders, a whisper carried on the wind. All are different notes of the same song. And Antarctica, with its endless expanses of resonant ice, is the perfect stage upon which that song plays. Skeptics will say these are natural sounds, nothing more. The earth groans, the wind howls, the glaciers shift. But those who have heard the ice speak insist there is intention in its rhythm. Natural forces do not choose their moments, do not coincide with trespasses into forbidden zones, do not echo like voices half-formed. The Guardians, it seems, do not always reveal themselves in form. Sometimes they are presence without body, vibration without face. Sometimes their very voice is the ice itself, humming endlessly, reminding those who would dig too deep that they are not welcome. In the silence of Antarctica, even the smallest sound carries weight. A crack in the distance can feel like an omen, a hum beneath the feet like a warning. And so the continent becomes not just a place of frozen landscapes, but of hidden music, a symphony of tones played by forces unseen. For those who listen carefully, it is impossible to mistake the message. Antarctica is guarded, not only by figures of ice and storms of snow, but by sound itself, a resonance that reaches mind, body, and soul, ensuring that the deepest secrets of the frozen land remain undisturbed. Until now, much of what we have traced are shadows. Voices in the wind, lights in the sky, footprints vanishing into storms. But in the darkest corners of Antarctic lore, there are stories far more visceral, accounts where men swear they did not merely glimpse the Guardians from afar, but stood in their presence. These are the close encounters, whispered by soldiers, sailors, and scientists long after they returned to safer lands, always in tones of awe or fear. If true, they are the most unsettling fragments of all, because they transform the Guardians from legends into tangible beings. One of the earliest and most persistent of these tales comes from Japanese whaling crews in the 20th century, who began reporting encounters with an enormous creature they called the Ningan. Described as a pale humanoid giant swimming beneath the Antarctic waters, the Ningan was said to be 90 feet long, with limbs resembling arms and legs, and a face disturbingly human. Sailors spoke of seeing its massive body surface briefly in moonlight before sinking silently into the depths. Some swore they heard it breathing, a low exhalation rolling across the waves like the sigh of something ancient. Others claimed their ships were shadowed by the being for hours, its pale form sliding beneath the hull, as though inspecting intruders in its domain. To skeptics, these were mistaken sightings of whales or icebergs, but to those who saw it, the Ningan was alive, intelligent, and watchful. If the Guardians walk upon the ice, then perhaps the Ningan is their kin beneath the sea, sentinel of the frozen waters. Military testimonies are rarer but more chilling. One anonymous account, attributed to a member of a U.S. Special Operations team in the 1980s, described a mission into a cavern system revealed by satellite anomalies. Inside, the team discovered pod-like enclosures, each containing humanoid figures suspended in ice. The beings were immense, more than 15 feet tall, with elongated skulls and ridged skin that gleamed faintly even in darkness. As they explored, a low vibration filled the chamber, rattling weapons and nerves alike. Then, the figure's eyes, pale, luminescent, opened. The team panicked, retreating in disarray as the cavern seemed to shake around them. None of the supposed entities pursued, but the message was clear. The explorers were not welcome. The cavern was sealed afterward, its coordinates erased from mission records. The soldier said nothing publicly until retirement, his story shared in fragments online, where it was dismissed as fiction. And yet, the details, pale giants, hums of energy, warning without violence, fit too closely with other accounts to be ignored. Civilian scientists have reported subtler but equally haunting encounters. In 2005, a small survey team drilling near the Transantarctic Mountains described hearing heavy footsteps outside their camp one night. They assumed it was a fellow researcher until they realized all team members were present and awake. When one man stepped out with a flashlight, the beam caught what he described as a figure too large to be a man, standing just beyond the circle of light. The creature did not move toward him, but turned its head slowly, eyes reflecting silver, before vanishing into the storm with strides too long for human legs. The scientists abandoned their work within days, officially citing equipment failure. Privately, they admitted to colleagues that they had been warned off in a way that required no words. Even stranger are the stories of encounters that blur the line between physical and mental. A Chilean researcher claimed that while working alone at a remote station in 2013, he felt a sudden, overwhelming presence. He described a sensation like pressure in his skull, followed by a voice, not external, but inside his mind. The message was simple: leave. Hours later, a storm erupted with a violence that destroyed much of his equipment. He was evacuated soon after. He never published his data, but in interviews years later he admitted that the voice was the most terrifying experience of his life. Whether hallucination or telepathic warning, it left him convinced the land itself was guarded by conscious will. And then there are the fishermen's stories. Rough, unpolished, but compelling. In the early 2000s, A crew operating illegally near Antarctic waters reported seeing what they thought was a capsized boat. As they approached, the wreck moved, rolling slowly to reveal a massive, pale figure with arms stretching outward. The men fled in terror, but one snapped a blurry photograph that still circulates on obscure forums. To most, it looks like an ice floe. To those who believe, it is one of the Guardians caught unaware, its body rising from the deep before slipping back into concealment. The consistency across these encounters is striking. The beings are always pale, immense, human-like, but not human. They do not speak aloud, but make their intentions known, through sound, through storms, through direct intrusion into thought. They rarely attack. Instead, they warn, repel, and vanish. It is as though their role is not to conquer, but to enforce boundaries, to remind humanity that some doors must remain closed, whether glimpsed in frozen caverns, stalked at night across snow, or rising from the sea as living icebergs. The Guardians reveal themselves only long enough to make their message clear. Skeptics argue, as always, that these are misperceptions. Whales mistaken for humanoids, exhaustion shaping shadows into giants, isolation breeding hallucinations. But such explanations falter when faced with the raw conviction of the witnesses. Men who have faced combat, storms, and solitude do not break easily. Yet those who speak of close encounters with the Guardians often tremble, their voices tightening, their words faltering. It is the testimony not of liars, but of those who carry experiences too heavy to dismiss, too strange to fit into accepted categories. Close encounters do not prove the Guardians exist, but they shift the story from rumor into something sharper, more dangerous. They suggest that beneath Antarctica's silence, there are not just anomalies, but presences. Beings who step forward when boundaries are crossed, who allow us to glimpse them only long enough to retreat. They are the final warning, the last threshold, the living embodiment of guardianship. And for those who have stood before them, whether in snow, storm, or sea, one truth becomes undeniable. Antarctica is not empty. It is inhabited. The closer one looks at the testimonies of those who claim to have stood before the Guardians, the more a subtle pattern emerges. These encounters rarely end in violence. Instead, they end in retreat, humans turned back, shaken, but alive. The footprints vanish into nothing, the glowing spheres dissolve into air, the towering silhouettes fade into storm. Each event seems staged less as a battle and more as a lesson, a controlled confrontation designed to test the limits of human trespass. It raises the unsettling possibility that the Guardians are not merely patrolling Antarctica, but evaluating us, measuring our response to boundaries we are not meant to cross. Consider the similarities. A team approaches a forbidden cavern, and vibrations rise until they flee. A pilot strays into a no-fly zone, and glowing orbs escort him out. A scientist drills too close to a subglacial lake, and a storm erupts before he can breach it. Each event feels calibrated, enough to intimidate, enough to halt progress, but never enough to annihilate. If the Guardians truly command the weather, energy, and even the mind, then they could obliterate intruders in an instant, yet they do not. Instead, they impose trials, subtle demonstrations of power that force humans to choose whether to persist or retreat. It is less defense than pedagogy, as though we are students stumbling into lessons far beyond our comprehension. Some researchers of the esoteric suggest that this is the essence of initiation. Across cultures, ancient myths describe initiatory encounters at the edges of the known world. Heroes who climb mountains and meet giants, shamans who descend into caves and confront spirits, kings who must pass through rituals of fear before ruling. In each case, the encounter is not meant to kill, but to transform, to separate those who respect boundaries from those who recklessly violate them. Antarctica, then, becomes less a forbidden continent and more a colossal initiation ground, with the Guardians as its keepers of ritual. The question is not merely whether you survive the encounter, but whether you learn from it. The Chilean scientist who heard a voice in his mind, "Leave," spoke afterward of feeling as though he had been judged, not simply threatened, but weighed, like a child whose behavior was being corrected by an unseen parent. The U.S. Navy pilot, escorted by glowing spheres, described a strange calm, as if the orbs were less hostile than protective, guiding him away from danger he could not perceive. Even the Japanese sailors who glimpsed the Ningan admitted that it never struck their ships, never harmed them, only watched and withdrew. These accounts align with the logic of a test. Provoke fear, instill respect, but leave room for choice. This interpretation adds a strange dimension to the Antarctic Treaty. Perhaps nations agreed not only to restrict access, but because they themselves had been tested and found wanting. Leaders who visited, politicians, religious figures, astronauts, may have been participants in their own trials, confronting presences that reminded them of humanity's smallness. Their silence upon return, their refusal to speak of what they saw, could be the silence of those who passed an initiation they barely understood. In this view, Antarctica is not only guarded but curated. Access is granted in increments, encounters permitted in fragments, each one designed to shape human perception without overwhelming it. There are parallels in ancient philosophy. The Greeks spoke of mysteria, secret rites that revealed truths only to the initiated, truths too dangerous or sacred for common ears. In Mesoamerican cultures, initiates often confronted visions of gods or monsters before being accepted as shamans. In Siberian traditions, the apprentice shaman was dismembered in visions, his body cut apart by spirits and rebuilt stronger. The Guardians' encounters, with their storms, vibrations, and telepathic commands, fit the same mold. Ordeals meant to dismantle human arrogance and rebuild humility. What if Antarctica itself is a global mystery school, a sanctum where lessons are delivered not by priests, but by ancient wardens of ice? Skeptics argue that this is anthropomorphism, projecting human ritual onto random natural events. Yet even skeptics admit the strangeness of restraint. If the Guardians were hostile aliens, why not conquer? If they were engineered soldiers, why not eradicate trespassers? Their restraint is the anomaly. It suggests intelligence not bent on domination, but on boundary setting, as if their purpose is not conquest but pedagogy. They are not at war with humanity. They are shaping the terms of our education. What is being taught? Perhaps respect for limits, the humility to recognize that not all knowledge belongs to us. In an age when humans drill into the Earth's deepest crust, send probes to distant planets, and believe no frontier is beyond reach, Antarctica stands as the final contradiction. It is the place that says, no further. And the Guardians are the enforcers of that curriculum, ensuring that humanity remembers boundaries exist. In a world of constant expansion, This is the ultimate lesson. Sometimes to stop, to retreat, is the act of wisdom. And yet, there is a darker possibility. What if these tests are not for our benefit, but for theirs? What if the guardians are not teaching us, but studying us, watching how we respond to fear, how we obey or resist, how far we will push against forbidden lines? In this version, Antarctica becomes less a school and more a laboratory, its icy vastness a stage upon which humanity reveals its instincts. The guardians observe, record, and judge. Whether they are researchers, jailers, or gods, we cannot know. But in every storm that drives explorers back, in every orb that redirects a pilot, in every whisper that paralyzes a scientist, one truth repeats. We are being watched, and our reactions matter. In the end, close encounters in Antarctica may be neither accident nor coincidence. They may be rites of passage, trials set before us to measure our readiness for truths still hidden. Some who return speak of terror, others of awe, still others of an inexplicable calm. Each response is part of the test, and the silence of governments, the restrictions of treaties, may be less about secrecy and more about submission. The acknowledgement that humanity, for now, remains a student before the guardians of the ice. By now, the contour of the mystery feels familiar, like a coastline traced by memory more than by map. We began with a wall of ice that rose before Ross like a verdict, the kind of boundary that does not explain itself. We followed a disciplined admiral who came home with words that sounded like parables, hinting at lands beyond the pole, as if the world had quietly doubled when no one was looking. We listened to sailors whisper about disks and beams of impossible light, to scientists mutter of silhouettes at twilight and machines that failed precisely where they should not. We learned to hear the continent the way a stargazer hears dark, to notice not only what appears, but what refuses to show itself. In that negative space, the legend took shape and gave itself a name: Guardians. The story fattened on absence. Treaties signed with rare unanimity fenced off a continent without fencing it in, the kind of agreement that tells you more by what it forbids than what it declares. Skies were parceled into corridors and blanks, satellite images blurred where curiosity ripens fastest. Visitors of improbable stature arrived on dates they should have been elsewhere, and left with explanations that satisfied only those who needed to be soothed. If Antarctica is theater, then someone has managed the lights with a cunning hand, drawing curtains over the exact places where the eye would otherwise dwell. In a century that believes it can see everything, the South remains the last instrument with its strings half muted. We chased origins because that is what humans do when facts thin out. Some pointed upward to the long, pale visages of Nordic visitors who warn rather than reign. Some pointed backward to drowned cities and punished giants, to watchers and Nephilim, to myths that behave like photographs misplaced in a family album. Others looked only to us, to the laboratories and hangars behind other curtains, to soldiers in armor white enough to pass for skin, to experiments that prefer ice because ice does not talk. Each story arranged the same furniture differently. In one, the guardians are envoys. In another, exiles. In a third, our inventions mistaken for gods. The room remained the same, a boundary kept, and a silence kept better. The land itself complicated things with its strangeness. A lake older than our species slept under 4 kilometers of glass and murmured with living codes. A river bled rust through a glacier like a wound that would not close. Valleys lay dry in a continent built of water. Mountains as tall as Europe hid like stowaways beneath a sheet no human could lift. Seismographs wrote long, patient sentences in notes too low to hear, and sometimes those sentences felt like answers to questions we were ashamed to have asked. It became hard to tell where geology ended and ritual began. Perhaps that is what a sanctuary feels like from the outside. Physics carrying itself with the manners of a temple. And sometimes the story drew near enough to fog the glass. Footsteps that ended nowhere. Eyeshine from beyond a circle of headlamp light, the pupils taking your measure with an animal's indifference and a judge's care. White spheres herding a pilot like a shepherd unwilling to injure the sheep. A shape in the water as big as a tail, surfacing with the slowness of certainty before it chose the depth again. A hum in the bones that arrived before the storm and left after the decision to turn back had already been made. These were not endings. They were punctuation. Commas where we wanted periods, colons where we begged for a final full stop. In time, a different reading suggested itself, less accusatory, more unsettling. What if these were not repulses but rights? We came near, and the weather answered a little too quickly. We pressed on, and the instruments answered with a language that sounded like refusal. We insisted, and a voice without mouth placed a single word into the mind like a hand upon a shoulder. Leave. There are initiations that change the initiate by scaring nothing out of him except certainty. Perhaps the guardians do not protect a secret from us, so much as a shape in us from a secret, a precaution against a revelation we would use like fire. Boundaries can be cages, they can also be porches. The comparison to Area 51 taught one last lesson by failing. Deserts hide projects, ice hides premises. One conceals artifacts, the other conceals arrangements. Nevada's fences say, do not enter. Antarctica's treaties say, do not assume. One day, a declassified photograph may show a machine once thought impossible sitting harmlessly in a hangar, its strangeness spent. What declassification will never show is a covenant, because covenants are not photographed. They are kept. If there is a pact in the South, it may be the oldest kind we know. You may come this far and no farther. You may ask this much and no more. You may keep your world if you learn to leave this one alone. And what lies this one? The rumors will continue to arrange themselves into architectures, pyramids whose angles are too obedient for accident, corridors mapped by radar like skeletons of intent, cathedrals of geothermal light beneath snow older than our names. Or none of these, only the long patience of ice doing what ice has always done. Remember for us what we cannot be trusted to keep safely in the open. There is a humility in believing the universe has gatekeepers. There is another sterner humility in conceding that we might need them. It is possible that the guardians are people in suits, and we, tired in weather, made drama of diligence. It is possible they are myths with excellent camouflage. It is possible they are as real as hunger and as unreachable as mercy. The one certainty is the feeling the story leaves in the mouth, a taste of salt and metal and old snow. We have lived an age convinced that the map's white spaces were errors waiting to be inked. The South teaches a different literacy. Some white spaces are not blanks. They are sentences in a grammar we do not read yet. And until we do, the kindest thing the page can offer is margin. So we step back from the wall that is not a wall and listen to the low music we cannot record on paper. We let the storm make its simple argument, and we allow our engines to fail with a grace that looks like wisdom. We admit that not every door must open simply because a hand knows the shape of a key. We leave the last continent to its keepers, whoever they are, whatever they keep. Cities or cells, prisoners or promises, fossils of futures we are not ready to dig up. We carry home a paradox heavy enough to quiet a room. The edge of the world was not a cliff, but a threshold, and the threshold spoke, and the word was no, and the no was merciful. If sleep has a geography, then it resembles this, a country of distances held safely apart, a hush where questions can cool without going out. Let the ice be the page, the wind the turning of it, the aurora the soft lamp asked to stay lit a little longer. Let the guardians, by whatever name, keep their watch, and let us, for 1 hour, for 1 night, practice the oldest pact of all, the one between waking and the story that wants to carry us across it. Close your eyes at the edge of the map, listen to what the white says, and when you feel yourself being led gently back from a door you are not meant to open, take the step that makes you smaller and safer. Then breathe, then drift. And as the ice recedes behind your eyelids and the room becomes a warm, navigable sea, welcome to historic sleep.